Morena tātou, me inoi tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te kātoa. Haumie, e, tāie.
Councillors. Just as there's members from the public, I'd like to extend a welcome to you and advise that the meeting's been recorded onto live stream onto the Council's YouTube channel. Health and safety requirements will be displayed on the screen. In the unlikely case of an emergency, we exit out onto Marae o Hine. It's non-smoking and vaping facility. All online participants, if you can keep your cameras turned on and just introduce yourself, anyone that's coming to present this morning. And every other one is for members and they're well known to you. Apologies is the next item, and I do have a few. Councillor Barrett, Councillor Marshall Lobb, the Mayor for early departure on council business, and myself for early departure. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Finlay for early departure. There being no others, I'll move those and look for a seconder. Councillor Naylor, thank you, and invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 12 votes for. Notification of additional items, are there any? There being none, we move on to declarations of interest. Are there any? There being none, that moves us on to public comment. I'm not aware of any, and there being none. This now moves us into a series of hearings. Each submitter has been allocated, that's wished to speak at this hearing, allocated a time slot of 10 minutes. We don't have a traffic light, but I'll just give you an indication of a minute to go, just to help. If that also includes time for members to ask questions. So just if you have, please allow time. It's quite interesting for members to ask questions and take your submissions as being read. Happy with that? Okay, so that moves us on to item 6, which is the Roxburgh Crescent land classification, hearing of submissions. I'll move these following recommendations 1 and 2 that are in the order paper, that the committee receive the submissions and hear submissions from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard in support of their submission, and 2, that the committee note the procedures of the hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet. I'll move those recommendations, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Invite a vote before we proceed. That's passed unanimously, 11 votes for. So we have 2 submitters on this topic on item 6. Francis Holdings Limited is the first one, and then Jackie Carr, and they're both here. Can I invite Francis Holding Limited to the table? Kevin Judd, welcome. You're well familiar with this table and the process. The floor is yours when you're settled.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I better put my glasses on, or I'll be speaking blind, so to speak. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to our submission. The submission I am referring to is submission number 1 in the Council's papers. I don't think I'll take 10 minutes, so I should be just a brief overview. As you're aware, my name is Kevin Judd. I'm a qualified land surveyor with over 40 years of land development experience in the Manawatu region. I am representing Francis Holdings Limited, which is a part of the Higgins Group of companies.
Kevin, can I just ask that you move your microphone slightly forward, just for the volume? That'll be helpful. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. So I came here for you to hear me, so yeah, it's important that you do. So, carrying on, I presume that you all know the location of the old Higgins Contractors Yard off Roxburgh Crescent. It's been used for Higgins for many, many years, and I think it's a sort of a well-known part of the town. The City Council owns a 6-metre piece of land which generally bisects through that yard. It's not very obvious where it is, but it is there, and it's owned by the City Council. This access strip is used from time to time by council and others to gain access to the stop bank and the river. It is not open for public use. Lately, it has been used for access to events such as the Relay of Life, which is held beside the river. So I think those people who participate in that event will certainly know the access they drive over, and that's the access that we're talking about today. Presently, there is an arrangement in place between Higgins and the City Council around the use of this access due to health and safety issues, especially the movement of large industrial machinery within the Higgins yard, or anything else that's proposed on that site. As you may be aware, the Higgins yard, along with other properties in the Roxburgh Crescent area, are presently going through a rezoning process, and that process will occur this year, hopefully. The part of the council property which passes through the Higgins yard is presently zoned conservation and amenity, however is not officially classified as a reserve. It is proposed to classify that part as road reserve, which we support, fully support. However, the timing of this change is important. It could be unsafe to activate the change to road reserve until the Higgins yard is not being used for any industrial purpose. We don't want people getting run over by trucks just because I think it's an access to the river. We believe the appropriate time to change the classification, and that's not to say that council can't go through the process of approving it, but actually activating the classification, is after the rezoning has been approved, which means that the land has actually become residential and the structure plan that's attached to the rezoning is more status, and if you've seen the rezoning application that's presently out for consultation, which has gone through consultation, it's showing a central road reserve, which is structured around this 6-metre access. And it's at that stage, we think, once the rezoning's been approved, and then any residential subdivision application on the Higgins land has also been approved, and it's important that that application is also approved, because it then cements in place the road reserves, any other reserves, and all parts, so it all ties in together. And it's at that stage we believe the classification should be finally activated. The land won't need to be road until the surrounding land is developed for residential purposes. It's not needed for road up until that moment in time. By delaying the classification, it will allow Higgins to safely use their land for industrial purposes until it is developed for residential use. The present access arrangement with council can still continue until that time. That's my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll open it up to members for questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Kevin. Have you had a chance to read the officers' summary submissions and their comments on your submission yet?
No, I haven't, sorry.
Okay. Well, no, that's fine. But what they have suggested is, in their opinion, that your request can be met by making the implementation of a classification, if approved, subject to or conditional on the plan change approval and subdivision occurring in a manner that ensures the road portion of the proposed classification is contiguous with the vested road reserve at the time of subdivision. Would that meet your concerns?
Yes, and I have talked to, I presume that's prepared by Mr. Phillips. I have talked to Mr. Phillips around that, and I think he had verbally conveyed that to me, but I hadn't seen that in writing.
Okay.
So I think that does generally meet our requirements. It's just important that it's in conjunction with the subdivision consent is when it needs to happen.
Okay. Right, thank you for that. That's great.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Kevin. Is your main concern around safety?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions, Kevin. Thank you very much for your submission and being here today to speak to it.
No, thank you for your time.
That moves us on to our next submitter, which is Jackie Carr. Just the button to the side to light the speaker. Perfect. Floor's yours when you're settled.
Here we are again. Good morning, everybody. I haven't had a chance to read all this lot by the time the printer had printed it. I got the gist of it. One of the things I'm most concerned about, and having a grandson at Winchester School, which is directly opposite the Roxburgh Crescent turn-off and the level crossing there, which the school uses. He, like myself, is very concerned about the safety aspect in terms of increased traffic. If you go down there at 8:30, which I was there, which is why I'm late, there is traffic building up coming down Albert Street because you've got Hooker Fitters School and St James's School there. You've got massive people wanting to turn down. That roundabout is chock-a-block and it's dangerous. And there's the dairy, people calling for a coffee or a takeaway lunch or something, or the local paper. So there's all that's people wanting to get out onto that roundabout. Then there's people coming towards the school along Manawatu Street, which turns into Ruahine Street. The buses go down there, the school bus, minibus goes down there. If you go down there, it's nose to tail parking, because although ideally we'd all like our kids to walk to school and walk with them, I remember when my kids were at school, you have to drop them off at a certain time, then you can go to work, or then you have to take the other child to a different school. So Newcastle Street, the back entrance to the school, which is where I live, is chocker as well, with people lined up. It's quite dangerous for the kids to come out the back entrance, but a lot of them do. The car park opposite the school is half full, probably of teachers' cars, but that is full and during the pick-up and drop-off times. So there's that aspect. The area next to Roxburgh Crescent includes a large area of state housing and the Scout Hut, which is still in use. And adjacent to the Scout Hut is a popular local walkway, and also cyclists use it. Cyclists actually use it to go to Massey and places like that. It's well used by local people. I wouldn't like it to be any busier than it already is. Dog walkers use it. It's a family walkway, and it can be made more use of. Also, it's quite a nice area to be in, because you look out onto nearby river and you've got access right along Massey Bridge and back the other way towards Napier Way. And there are groups of trees that have been planted which do attract some wildlife. It would be nice to see that area developed for amenity and conservation in conjunction with a limited amount of housing. We don't have to cram them all in like battery hens with no room to swing a cat. I don't know what sort of housing is actually proposed. I know that you've gone down from being 3-storey to lower, because obviously nobody really wants to be overlooked. People want to feel safe. I suggest the first priority, if you're going to develop that area, is to plant trees, spade ready, and get the local community, or they're called community service volunteers, but it is an alternative to prison for some people, or wearing a bracelet. So I'm also concerned that it's near the floodplain. I hope that the technical people have been out there doing soil surveys and poking about and assessing it, because if you cover all that area in concrete and tarmac, there will be increased runoff, there will be increased stormwater, that will be extra cost down the road in stormwater management, and extra costs in infrastructure will be incurred anyway with, hopefully, there could be some cycle lanes and make it safer for pedestrians and for cyclists in that area. At the moment, there's no cycle lane down Ruahine Street, and there's nothing towards the roundabout either. I'm not quite sure what cyclists are supposed to do when they get to that roundabout. Pray, I think. So yes, that's, it would be a way of paying it forward to plant trees as a priority and hide that really ugly fencing which surrounds the presently half-occupied industrial area. I think that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm going to open it up to members if there are any questions. Councillor Zebulon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jackie. I just had a question for the road classification and reserve classification that we're dealing with now. There is a proposal to include car parking and amenity. Would that address some of the concerns that you have about the car parking and lack of vegetation?
It depends how much of an area you're going to give to car parking. And it also depends on the type of housing. Hopefully it's going to be a mixture. Hopefully it will include some low-level housing suitable for elderly, disabled and perhaps less socially well-off. And we don't want to see an elitist area and then a sharp division between the likes of Crewe Crescent and Piatu Street or wherever.
Okay. Thank you. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for your time being here today to speak to your submission.
Sorry, I wasn't better prepared.
That's fine. We'll be receiving the item for both submitters, which is the summary of submissions, which is item 10 today, later in the morning. So that would be a fairly straightforward report, though. But you're happy to listen in on any other item today. Thank you. That moves us now to item 7, which is the draft waste management and minimisation bylaw, hearing of submissions. And I'll move from the chair that the committee receives the submissions and hear submissions from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard in support of their submissions. And 2, that the committee note the procedures for the hearing of submissions as described in the procedures sheet. I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Naylor, and invite a vote. Is everyone here for this one? One's online. That's passed unanimously, 10 votes for. And 2 people didn't vote. I'm going to retake that vote. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to invite the vote now. That is passed unanimously, 12 votes for. That moves us to item 7, and we have 3 submissions that wanted to be heard. All 3 are here. The first one is New Zealand Precycle. Chris Teo-Sherrell and Enviro New Zealand are our submitters wishing to be heard. I'd now like to invite the New Zealand Precycle, which is submission number 17, to the table. Yes, and this is Nelson Harper. Kia ora, good morning.
Kia ora. Thanks for hearing my submission. It was quite a big one, so I appreciate you hopefully reading it. So I won't go into all the detail, just the main points. But just for those who don't know me, I'm Nelson. My background is chemical bioprocess engineering, really passionate about waste. So I've been in waste and carbon management space for about 5 years. Started the business a bit over 3 years ago. And my interest here is, we also do a lot of advising councils and businesses around how they manage waste. My interests in submitting is for environmental reasons, for commercial reasons, and for economic growth of the region. So around the event waste minimisation, a lot of the commercial events and private events currently use volunteers for their waste sorting, and it is ineffective. So without enforcement, the results are quite inconsistent. So before we started working with the council on the event waste, there was volunteers which used a lot of cost and training, and the council was still paying for their services, but the results weren't repeatable. So there's actual data held by the council that the average bins for recycling and organics was 40 to 80% contaminated at most of these events. Since we've started and having trained people actually sorting through these bins, we've consistently had no contamination for about 3 years in these bins. So this isn't the case for a lot of events around the city that we don't work at. So Rural Games, as an example, has a lot of waste. They have the recycling bins, but they don't manage to achieve the contamination rates, so they all end up landfilled. So we would like this to be mandatory for events with some clear compliance expectations. With volunteers alone not being able to achieve the waste diversion, so having trained staff or having some kind of accountability through measuring the contamination, not just the waste diversion. So the city actually benefits quite a lot by having cleaner venues, reduced operational costs, and stronger environmental leadership in that event space. To make it not cost prohibitive, we've suggested maybe a tiered system based on smaller events would be more of a strong encouragement. Medium events would have mandatory diversion, and then large events would have mandatory with full compliance and penalties if they don't comply. And a few examples of where this has been successful is Wellington and the Greater Wellington Councils, and also in the Western Bay of Plenty, where there's a lot of, Wellington's quite a good example where it's part of the bylaw and there's a lot of work goes into actually getting those results. But to support it as well, there needs to be sufficient resourcing and education. So there needs to be education, funding incentives, clear guidelines to event holders. Vendors need to be accountable. So a lot of the waste that comes through that can't be recycled or composted is because the vendors choose those packaging, whether it's intentional on price or whether they don't care about sustainability. Is not really the point, but there should be some clear guidelines about the types of packaging. And the contamination should be monitored, like I said before, not just diversion. With the reusables, we've done trials of a dishwashing food truck with the council, and that was quite successful. But in the bylaw, there's a mention of this, and it works really well for medium-sized events, but scaled up to larger events would be quite costly to manage. So I think there's a definite place for that, but that shouldn't be the emphasis on having reusables at events. For the construction and demolition, C&D waste is one of the big waste streams for the city and for the country. It's part of the waste minimisation goals for the city, so definitely think there needs to be some effort put in there and some kind of controls. So yeah, we support that the waste minimisation plans should be enforced through the consenting process, but also looking at not just the cost of the project, but the volume of waste expected from the project. So jobs like demolition might be a low value project, but have quite significant waste. Encourage on-site sorting of waste and using, encouraging or requiring licensed facilities to sort the waste and track that, so you've actually got some data on that. And we suggest that prohibiting stockpiling of C&D waste materials that don't have a viable end market, so that it doesn't end up just in a big pile somewhere. So there's a few local businesses. So Central Environmental over in Fielding is one example of a quickly developing facility that can sort construction waste. It's all regulated and certified, so encouraging use of that, or having the council partner with a company like that could be a good move. But having local industry as part of the conversation, having like some kind of support group there to actually understand the complexities and see what's actually safe, viable, and practical. For the licensing of waste collectors, we have kind of mixed views on this. There's some positives and negatives. Positives, it could hold some of the larger businesses accountable to their waste practices and kind of encourage a better use of how they manage their waste. But the flip side is that it may harm smaller businesses, may kind of make it harder for smaller businesses to come in without necessarily changing any of the bigger players. There's also kind of a middle level of business that can come in currently at the moment offer very cheap rates but not do anything in terms of sustainability, because there is a cost to that. So I think maybe having it priced either as a tiered system on size or on kind of outcomes sustainability-wise. That's pretty much it. So just my final kind of points is that needs to be accountability, enforcement and resourcing for whatever comes from this, for this bylaw to create any real change and not just encouragement. And we need a system that works for everyone, including event holders, waste providers, businesses and residents, without any negative impacts. Cool, thank you.
Great, thank you, Nelson. We have time for open it up to questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Nelson, for that very comprehensive submission, actually. Well done. We've had a number of submissions from people, I suppose, that don't work in this area, who are members of the public majority, who are concerned about us increasing operating costs for businesses if we increase compliance. What's your thought on that?
So if is this about event waste or C&D waste? Or?
I think, well, they were worried about cost to themselves. I think it's probably around licensing waste collection.
Right. I think, yeah, there is a danger in the licensing side of things that the cost will be passed on to the end user. And I guess it may block out some people from competing in that market, which then may also have consequences.
Okay, so do you, I guess, are you more focused on the outcomes that we might be able to achieve by including accountability, enforcement and resourcing rather than the cost to end users?
For the licensing, I'd say probably yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute left. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nelson, for coming and making a submission. I just wanted to ask around the event space that you talked about, requiring medium and large events to have diversion requirements. My question would be, do you have an idea of what that would cost, particularly for not-for-profits and charities running events? I'm trying to understand, are we talking $5,000 or $20,000 here, for example?
There's a lot of different ways you could do it. So we've done events for like large sports, like a touch championship, and it costs somewhere between 5 to 10 grand over a 3-day event. For council events, for example, they might be, just a couple of $1,000s, and that's quite a labour-intensive way of doing it. There are other ways to do it that can be reduced. So we're talking to venues at the moment about things like their sports events, stock cars, which would be obviously a hard one to change. But by taking that waste out and sorting it behind the scenes, it's a lower labour cost and not such a kind of visible thing, but you still get the outcomes. So it comes down to how you manage it.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's exhausted our time this morning. Thank you very much for your submission and being here today to present.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Chris Teo Sherrell to come and present to his submission. Kia ora, good morning. Submission number 19. Okay, ready when you are.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Look, I'll get straight into it because there isn't much time. Referring to bylaw part 3 of the bylaw, this is about licensing transporters and collectors of waste. The point I made there, I think, is very straightforward, and I'm just urging you need a way of dealing with that, and I think the previous speaker just talked about a tiered system of licensing. Seems eminently suitable, so please make that happen. Talking about part 5 of the bylaw, this is construction and demolition waste, and it is my paragraphs 4 to 16 in my submission. It's wonderful that Palmerston North City Council is finally dealing with this. This was identified years and years and years ago, I think when the first waste minimisation plan was developed in about 2009. So it's great. But although the types of material involved in construction and demolition are very similar, you need to have different approaches for construction and demolition for the reasons that I've stated in my paragraphs 5 to 8 of my submission. Deconstruction and demolition of houses typically produces about 30 tonnes of waste, whereas the construction of an ordinary new house, about 3 tonnes. So it really, and the costs associated with these, as the previous speaker said, are vastly different. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for new construction, perhaps tens of thousands for deconstruction and demolition. So it just doesn't make sense to use cost as the only criterion. And like the previous speaker, it should be based on expected amount of waste to be produced. And BRANZ, the Building Research Association in New Zealand, has lots of information on the amount of waste generated by different building activities, and that includes demolition. And of course, not using the requirement for a building consent as a criterion, because many activities that generate lots of building and demolition waste don't require a building consent, as I detailed. I am concerned about the bit where it says, 13.1, I think, where it says, at some stage, council will make a resolution. God, this is the time to make the resolution, that sets the principle that, yes, we will require licensing, waste minimisation and management plans for construction and demolition. Then let all the detail be worked out by officers and put it in the administration manual. And if you could just show the slide that I've sent or had prepared. Thank you very much, Council, for that. So the way that I think needs to be done is to adopt the clauses 13.1 to 13.4 that I've specified in my submission. Then what is currently 13.3, make it 13.5 and have it as, I presume, yeah, it's up there, have it say that. So you make the decision to require the waste minimisation plans now in this bylaw. You let officers get on, deal with all the details of how that's done, and then this clause would say, when all that is specified and put in the information manual, that's the time that people would need to produce these waste minimisation and management plans for construction and demolition, and not before. So it's the same intent as what's there now, but it's done so that it's, you make the decision in principle now, let officers work to, and then implement it. Moving on to the administration manual, part 3. And this covers the classification of waste and diverted materials, and it's my paragraphs 17 to 21. Two key points here, I think there are. The first one is that you need to include approved divertible materials in the list of prohibited waste. And the consequence of that would be that people then wouldn't be allowed to put recyclable bottles and paper and all that sort of stuff into the residual bag, or in the case of commercial collectors, residual bin. Okay, and I remember that diagram that showed, the different sizes of bins, and the bigger the bin, the more recyclables were mixed up with the stuff that goes to landfill. And that's just dumb, really dumb. So this would be a way of prohibiting that, and it would then mean that when you introduce a food scraps collection, you can just put it in the approved divertible materials table, and it automatically becomes a prohibited waste and shouldn't be put in the residuals bag. Now, of course, you allow for a small amount of contamination because, sometimes people just make mistakes. And sometimes the container is so contaminated that you really don't want it to be in the recyclables. But it's not talking about that. And the problem here is some people are just not worrying about recycling. They're just putting everything into one bin because it's easy and they don't have to think, can't think. To make that effective, you need to have effective monitoring and enforcement. And I outlined an approach in my submission that I think would do that. And you don't need to go to a whole lot of cost inspecting everybody's bin. That's ridiculous, impractical. The way I suggested, I think, is worth a try because the methods that have been used to date simply haven't worked. We've been doing it for 15, 20, 25 years. And still, the level of contamination, when you have a little blitz, will go down and then it climbs back up and up and up and up and up. Enforcement is key to this. We've done tons of education and that needs to continue, but we need to enforce. Okay, Administration Manual Part 5. So my paragraphs 22 to 24 cover this. And it's about the need to require residents who are using the commercial waste collection services to abide by the same rules that are set for people who use the council services. So, if you've got the divertible materials in the prohibited list, they're not allowed to put those in the residual bag. By the same token, those customers of commercial collectors wouldn't be allowed to put everything into the bin that ends up going to landfill. So that's what that's about. And unless you deal with that as well, you're going to have very little impact on the total amount of waste going to landfill because we know the council services are used by a small proportion of people, at least the waste services. Just a single comment about my paragraphs 25 to 30, which concern where commercial collectors should be allowed to operate as part of their licenses. And this is to make the point that I think that PNCC needs to stay in there as a collector for 3 reasons. So that it knows the actual practicalities of collection and the associated costs. So that it can provide substitute services should it be necessary to suspend or cancel a license of a commercial contractor because of non-compliance. And C, so that parts of the more distal parts of the city are served, because I doubt that those are very attractive to commercial contractors, given the distance that has to be travelled just to collect one bin up at the top of Scots Road or Kahutaroa. So what I've proposed, in summary, would address 3 of the 4 elements of PN's waste situation that were identified as having the greatest potential to decrease the amount of waste being sent to landfill, which I think is the objective here. Those are, it would deal with C&D waste, it would deal with the problem of divertible waste being sent to landfill, including food scraps, and it would ensure commercial waste collectors and their customers have to operate by the same rules as PNCC and the residents that use PNC services. But it doesn't address ICI, industry, commerce, and industrial waste. And that was the really big one that was identified in Eunomia's waste audit. So I suggest, actually, get on with this one, with the amendments that I and others have suggested, and then come back and deal with ICI separately. Because by the time you've dealt with ICI, it'll be another 5 or 10 years. Make progress while you can with what you've got, improve it, and then get on with the next one. And that will then, I think, get Palmerston North's target of getting waste to landfill right down a reality. Thanks very much. Welcome any questions on these major points that I've made. But if you want to talk to me about the minor points, talk to me afterwards, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. You have used your 10 minutes to almost on the dot. Thank you very much for your written submission. Thank you for your presentation today of the submission, and that will be referred through to the item which is later in our order paper, item 11. It's included in the summary of submissions.
Thanks, Vaughan. Time flies when you're having so much fun. Look, if you want to talk to me about any of the points at all, you're more than welcome to contact me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. Reset that. And now we have our last submitter on this item, and I understand ready and waiting on Teams. We have Lawrence Dalton and Mike Downer from Enviro New Zealand. Kia ora, good morning. The floor is yours when you're ready. You have 10 minutes to present, and that includes any time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off. My name's Lawrence Dole, and I'm the National Environmental Manager for Enviro NZ. And with me is Mike Downer, who is the Head of Operations for the Lower North Island for Enviro NZ, and he has management responsibility for the Palmerston North area and Manawatu. And we're the second largest waste company in New Zealand, and we operate something like 60 sites around the country, which includes transfer stations, materials recovery facilities, composting plants, clean fills and landfills, and also hazardous and liquid waste treatment facilities. In Palmerston North, we operate a transfer station depot at 31 Matthews Ave, and we also have a joint venture as part of Midwest Disposals, which takes Palmerston North's refuse up in Martin. The company really supports what the council is doing here with its waste minimisation plans and the bylaws. However, we just have a couple of issues that we wish to bring to the committee's attention for their consideration in finalising the bylaw. And I'll pass over to Mike now to talk about construction demolition waste.
Kia ora and good morning, everybody. Thank you for listening. Look, our submission was pretty simple. It was only a few pages long. Just in respect to the construction and demolition waste, we're simply asking council to clearly define what that waste is. We believe the challenge ahead will be one of education to those developers and what they can do to achieve diversion that is manageable and cost effective. And we feel that a template would be very useful and made available to them. It also standardised the information that is provided back to council with regards to the auditing and reporting functions as well that come out of this. With regards to the commercial waste licences themselves, look, we support the licensing of commercial waste collectors. We have that operating with us in Wellington as well. But one of the things we would like some clarification on is with regards to the reporting and auditing, it says in the bylaw that council will define the waste types. We would just like them to be consistent with what the ministry is doing to avoid any confusion and duplication of information. Ambiguity is something that's going to ruin the information coming through and won't provide that clarity that you're looking for. So if it was standardised in line with what the ministry is doing, and the reporting templates for us as collectors are given to us, we can make sure that we're providing in the information in the format required, and you are getting that from all the collectors in the same format. Pretty simple. Just moving on very quickly, it says that council are looking will define what the source collection type, and that's residential, commercial, or industrial. We just need that to be very clear about what your source collection type is, because for most collectors operating out there, those three streams, the residential, the commercial and the industrial, could be collected in the same truck in the one route, because as it moves through the city, collecting through those different zones. One of the options that could be perhaps a little bit more accurate would be the source type of the collection, and that is if it comes from a front load truck, a rear load truck, or is it just an NGB? It's a little difficult to try and separate that waste. Not everything's fitted with scales, so you're not going to be able to clearly define what comes out of which particular residential, commercial or industrial type. And maybe it could be done on zoning. I think that's something that the council needs to define clearly for its reporting requirements. With regards to the compliance with standards, in that in particular to the type of waste containers that are out there. Look, we support this, and I know the council doesn't want 44-gallon drums turning up on the curbside because somebody starts a business and that's what they're going to use to collect. Understand that. What we're looking for is that the bylaw needs to consider the freedom of collectors to act in a competitive environment and to provide the best solution that meets the needs of the customers with regards to volumes, access for vehicles, timeframes for collection, and the waste streams that need to be dealt with. If the permitted or the type of collection device is not given that flexibility that we need, we're not going to get that optimal collection solution for those customers, and we need that flexibility. And with regards to the likes of, it could be just wording with regards to that, okay? So it might be, we want MGBs because they're nice and tidy. Now they've got lids on them, for, you know, and everything can be contained. And it might be a range of things, e.g. an 80 litre through to a 300 litre wheelie bin is permitted for the collection of this material, and just leave it at that for the market to determine what the customers and the providers might be able to give to that site. Also, the collection timeframes, it's not clear as to what that actually means for us. And that is, you know, are we talking specifically curbside collections only for times and days? We would need to make a weekend available as well, as we know that there are public holidays that fall during the week and the collection may roll over to a Saturday. So in order to make sure the waste is collected, we would need flexibility across the week to make that happen. Also, the collection areas, whilst council have, with their recycling collection, they'll have set routes where they're in certain areas on certain days. Ourselves and other collectors in the market don't necessarily follow the exact same pattern because of route density and trying to achieve some efficiency with regards to that. And we need some flexibility to make sure that we've got that as well. I think it's been mentioned before that if we can try and keep costs from passing on to the resident, then that's a win. So operating way we are now to try and maximise our efficiency would be preferred, obviously.
Yeah, so I think that are sort of the main points we wanted to make. We've just suggested a couple of minor amendments, but I'd also like to say that we're really supporting what the council's doing, and if we can assist in any way, helping council staff better understand the way that collection operations work on the ground, or you know, management of materials processes for waste collection, management and recycling, we're happy to make our staff and facilities available.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's really, Lawrence, it's just that sort of making a point that we need to allow space within the bylaw for innovation and individual customers' needs being met, and just flexibility with regards to that. Yeah. I think with regards, I mean, Lawrence, chip in if there's anything more to add, but from our point of view, is just with regards to the draft waste management plan and minimisation bylaw, with the compliance standards, we just need to understand more fully how you plan to apply it. And as Lawrence has said, you're welcome to engage with us and talk to us and see how we do what we do, and to see if that will help you. That's an open invite.
Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. I'll pass it to members. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your submission. When you were talking about the guidelines around containers, is it primarily restrictions on the size of the container that's concerning you?
Yeah, it would be if it was, for example, if a specific stream like recycling must have a 120 litre bin. Well, that might be good for some people, but restrictive for others, and maybe they need a 240 to encourage that size. So we'd be looking for the ability to, for the customers to have a selection, if you like, of bins that would allow them to find something that works for them.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of passing on any costs of compliance to customers, do you anticipate there'd be significantly increased costs if these, if this was to be introduced for you?
It depends on what came out of the bylaw. If it was, if it required major change with regards to routing and density, then it would have an impact on what the cost would be to service an area, and it would be quite clear that that would have an impact, and how we deal with that would be something that we'd need to consider.
So that would be primarily around your ability to organise your own routes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's concluding our time this morning. Thank you very much for your submission and being here today to present. Ngā mihi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The item 7. That now moves us on to item 8, and this is a presentation from Kia Toa Rugby Football Club Incorporated. Ray, can I just check with you, do we have another presenter we're waiting on, or is it just the two of you this morning? Great stuff. So Ray Swidell, Life member and the Club Rooms project manager. And can I get you to introduce your co-presenter this morning? Would you mind doing that? And you have 10 minutes to present this morning. And of course, this relates to item 12, and then there will be time afterwards for questions from members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm joined this morning by our architect from the local practice of 242, and that's Monica Puri. Contrary to that earlier advice, her associate cultural advisor, Kerry Waikiri Fee, will not be presenting with us, just with regard to the 10-minute allocation. So good morning, Mr Mayor, Chair and Councillors. As Vaughan has said, I'm a Life member of Kia Toa, and I'm acting as project manager for our Club Rooms proposal, including this land lease request to Council. We had hoped to have our President Kenny Johnson join us this morning, but he's travelling back from New Plymouth. So we've got a bit of jam on the slides. I'll carry on anyway. Kia Toa was formed in 1902, and as such it's Palmerston North's oldest rugby club. The current team numbers are shown here on the screen there, and we have a strong supporter membership with prominent groups of Pākehā, Māori and Pacifica, many of whom are in the vicinity of Bill Brown Park. Over the last couple of decades, we've operated from 8 club room venues, and we have regularly moved for various reasons. These issues facing the club were shared with Chief Executive Wade Crockett back in July 2023. Throughout, however, there has been a long-term ambition by our membership to have club rooms at our home ground of Bill Brown Park. So there's an aerial of the footprint of the lease that we're seeking. We see our club rooms as an integral part of our sporting activities. And so the current proposal before you comprises of transportable prefab building modules for a 2-stage project, sited on a 751 square metre footprint, adjacent to the northeastern fence line of the hardstand courts, and extending into the playing fields a similar distance as for the proposed PNCC car park extension. I'll now hand over to Monica to go through we'll introduce the concept design to you.
Kia ora, everyone.
Sorry, on the
Sorry.
right-hand side, you're ready to go.
Kia ora. It's jammed again. Okay. So just presenting our concept design. We had a lot of design drivers, but the key ones was that we wanted a place to uphold the Kiotoa values of Manakitanga, Whanunatanga, Kotahitanga and Whakapapa. We wanted to make sure the space is inclusive and a multicultural space. And the other key thing was we wanted to make sure there's enough memorabilia space and budget. For this was one of the key design drivers. Just looking at the site context, we just sort of analysed the site and we understood as a lot of people came through Havelock North Avenue, and we wanted to make sure that the Kiotoa Club Room had a strong presence, and hence the one in the pink over there is where we're proposing the Kiotoa with the northerly aspect. We also wanted to make sure we acknowledge the Pacifica Community Hall through either visual corridors and also have visual corridors to the existing and the new proposed rugby fields. The other aspect of the spatial adjacencies was the cultural assimilation into the place. We started off by creating a formal entry or artia. That's important to acknowledge the entry and have a northerly aspect. For us, the values of Whakapapa and Whanunatanga were important and were meant to be represented through an entry which had an exhibition or a memorabilia space, which basically created a sense of belonging and a nod to the past. The big yellow part is where we have the gathering space, which to us is where we have the Manakitanga or Kotahitanga, where Manakitanga means generosity, it means hospitality, and Kotahitanga is a sense of belonging. And with having the green area, which is the kitchen, as the main servery, it kind of brings everything together. So this is our subtle cultural assimilation into the spatial configuration that we came up with. In terms of the contextual aspect, I'll just slightly touch on it where we had the two main corridors or pathways, one connecting all the existing facility to the rugby fields, and another one we also wanted to make sure we had a service corridor for all your bins and all your other services, and then the light green shaded is where it connects to the future of the Kiotoa Club Room. We might have maybe in the future another building in the same leased land. Looking at the floor plan, we created the RTO, you've got a ramp, but the other key factor was the pour, the 4 pours that represent each of the value of Kiotoa, and that was like a physical acknowledgement every time you pass through the entrance that these are the values that represent Kiotoa. Moving through the memorabilia space and into the 2 main dining halls. The main dining hall looks out onto the viewing deck up north, and then you have a secondary dining hall which opens up to the west elevation and visually connects to the Pacifica community. And then this is just a concept sketch of what we think the Kiotoa Club Room will look like. The iconography is just a placeholder at the moment because we would like to have a stakeholder engagement and come up with graphics that represent Kiotoa, and the Rangitane or Manawatu would be involved in designing the 4 pours that represent the 4 values of Kiotoa. So this is the northerly aspect, and then this is the other view of the rugby field connecting to the viewing deck.
Thanks, Monica. The land lease application documentation was submitted to council officers on the 28th of January of this year, outlining how it fits with council policy direction and meets the various assessment considerations of Section 8C of council support and funding policy. Subject to council granting the land lease, Kiotoa will need to apply for a resource consent controlling activities in the club rooms, followed by a building consent and liquor licence. Kia Taua celebrates its 125th anniversary in 2027 and wishes to have stage 1 of the club rooms proposal completed for that event. As requested by Council, Kia Taua has submitted its most recent audited financial accounts and a business case for the club rooms proposal to demonstrate readiness to proceed with the project. 85% of the estimated capital cost can be met from an investment fund held on behalf of the club. The balance is currently being sought from donations and separate fundraising. Operating costs will be budgeted as part of the club's ongoing year-to-year financials. Kia Taua is aware of 2 future PNCC capital work programs at Bill Brown Park, namely the additional car parking and Pacifica Centre expansion. These are being coordinated with our club rooms proposal through discussions with council officers. Subject to granting of the land lease and resource consent, Kia Taua is likely to request advancing the car park extension by 1 year into 26-27. Kia Taua endorses the council officer's recommendations for the land lease application to proceed to the public consultation phase. A letter of support for the application has been received from Manawatu Orangatani. The proposal has been presented to Papia'a Pacifica Community Trust and was well received. The Trust advised they intend to forward a letter of support. Thank you for the opportunity to make the presentation, Mr. Chair, and we look forward to a positive response through your deliberations.
Thank you very much, Ray. We'll move into questions, and actually want to acknowledge Kenny Johnson, the club president's arrival. Thank you. And feel free to come and join them up at the table for questions if you like. Move into questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming and presenting. I just have a question around the proposed term of the lease that council officers have recommended. They've suggested a 10-year lease on the land, which I thought was odd given the scale of investment. And I see in your application you've put, this is on page 120 for councillors, point 40, you'd ideally lease the land in perpetuity, but preferably for 33 years, which is allowed under the Act. I'm just wondering, 10 years doesn't seem satisfactory to me, but is 10 years satisfactory to yourselves?
We haven't discussed that with the officers. I noted that, as I understand it, that would be a minimum, and then it would be, I guess, a right of renewal for that as if we're a good tenant. But yeah, obviously the longer term tenure we've got, but we'll be working through those details with the officers. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The Mayor. Oh, sorry, did you come out? Same question. There's no further questions. Thank you very much for a thorough presentation. And of course, item 12 will be later in the morning. I'll move the recommendation that the Strategy and Finance Committee receive the presentation for information, seconded by Councillor Naylor, and invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 12 votes for. That moves us on to the minutes, and I'm happy to move the minutes of our meeting of the 13th of November 24, Part 1 Public, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or matters arising. There being none, I'd now like to invite a vote that the minutes of the Strategy and Finance Committee meeting 13th of November, Part 1, Public, be confirmed as true and correct record. Thank you. That has passed 10 votes for and 2 abstentions. Now we move into the series of summary of submissions for the earlier hearing. And can I invite Aaron Phillips, Activity Manager for Parks, to come forward to present item 10, the Roxburgh Crescent Land Classification Summary of Submissions. Floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair, Mayor and Councillors. Aaron Phillips, Activity Manager for Parks. Pretty straightforward one. This one, as you've already heard from the submitter, the only point of particular note was the timing of the proposed classification. We're proposing that we'll bring forward, or put conditions on the classification proceeding that manage that, and we're all in agreement. There's only the 2 submissions, and that was the only point of note that we took. So happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Zeba Ballin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. Hey, I just had a question because I was rereading the report from the 14th of August, and it talked about the reserve classification happening in a 2-step process. One which was for the classification of both, and that's under Section 14 of the Reserves Act, and then a second one which was the vesting of the road, which would happen under Section 111. And that would occur at the same time as the vesting of the other new roads in the subdivision. So I'm just wondering, is that approach out the window now and we're moving to a different mitigation of putting conditions on it?
We're proposing probably that while it was described as a 2-stage process, then the timing of both of those steps would probably occur would occur at the time of subdivision. So the vesting, the classification and vesting would occur at the time of subdivision to ensure the submissions objectives are met. Sorry, I haven't got the other report in front of me, so if I'm confusing that slightly, I apologise.
That's right, thank you. It did note in that report that this, for step 2 in dedicating the local purpose road reserve as road would happen once step 1 was completed, and then council would consider dedicating that area under a separate section. So
probably an oversight in that report on reflection of from the submission, but if we classify it as road now prior to the subdivision and vesting of that land as road, we would end up creating a situation where the public would technically have public access to it because it would be road. So apologies, probably didn't understand that fully at the time.
okay, thank you, that's helpful, thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. There's no further questions. Thank you for that report. I'll move the recommendations pertaining to this item. There's a slight amendment to it from our order papers here or not? Yeah, slight amendment to it. That the committee received the memorandum titled Roxburgh Crescent Land Classification Summary of Submissions presented to the Strategy and Finance Committee on the 26th of February 2025, and this is the addition, and refer deliberations to council, and that's just so we don't have to wait to the May meeting of this committee. I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Open it up for any comments or debate. There being none, I'd like to invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 11 votes for. Moves us to item 11, which is Draft Waste Management and Minimisation Bylaw 2025, and it's a summary of submissions, and invite Peter Ridge, our Senior Policy Analyst, to present this item.
Kia ora koutou. I'll take the report as read. As I've heard the submissions this morning, a number of points have been raised. We've summarised those in the report. The next step in the process will be to bring analysis of those points, both the written and oral submissions, to the May committee, with advice at that point for deliberations and adoption of the bylaw. Happy to take questions.
Great, thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, thank you. Just on page 82, around the engagement process, there's a note here that says staff also extended the opportunity for any stakeholder group to arrange a separate engagement meeting if desired. What does that mean? How do you extend an opportunity to a stakeholder group? Did you contact people directly or?
Yeah, so throughout our stakeholder engagement, we contacted them via email. We provided them copies of the material, and we extended an opportunity if they wanted to meet in person and discuss it in more detail. Then we were able to do that with them.
So who were the stakeholders identified?
off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember. I think we had, for all of the areas that were directly affected, for instance, event managers, we contacted event managers that we were aware of who have held events in the last 5 or so years. We contacted the construction and building industry through the Build Palmy newsletter. So that was just under 400 email addresses that went out to. We included the waste collectors that we know of operating in the city. So that included EnviroNZ, a number of others. Nelson Harper, as we heard today from Precycle, was included there. We also included anyone who made a submission on the waste management and minimisation plan. So it was quite a broad stretch. Yeah.
Thank you. And you've pretty much answered my next question, but it did feel odd to me reading the submissions. No event providers, no construction companies or developers, and really only one of the rubbish collectors actually made a submission. Do you think there's a reason that they didn't engage in the process?
I don't know that you could say that they didn't engage in the process. I can't speculate as to why they choose or choose not to make a submission.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Zeba Ballin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Peter. A couple of the submitters did suggest that we be more prescriptive of what constitutes C&D waste, noting that waste can be pretty generic. It might be limited to like preconceived ideas. Is there, do you think, value in us exploring that as we work through the bylaw?
I think I'd hesitate to prejudge any recommendations that might come to the May Committee. But I do know that the points made by submitters about classification of waste and different types, definitely worth exploring further, and so we'll be working on that over the next few months.
Thank you. There was also quite a novel penalty suggestion for the 3 strikes for contamination in recycling bins with a morning working on the sorting line at the MRF. I just wondered if you had any advice on whether we have any capacity to explore that from a health and safety perspective or not.
Again, not wanting to prejudge future recommendations, I think you hit the nail on the head there with health and safety and employment law. I think there will be some issues there to explore, but if there's anything to take forward with that, we'll bring that into the May report.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Peter. There's no further questions. Thank you for presenting this summary. I'll move from the Chair that the committee receive the memorandum titled Summary of Submissions Draft Waste Management and Minimisation Bylaw 2025, presented to the Strategy and Finance Committee of the 26th of February 25, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Happy to. And open it up for any comments or debate. There being none, I'd now like to invite a vote. That is passed unanimously, 11 votes for. That brings us to item 12, which is the Bull Brown Park proposal to support Kia Toa Rugby Club Incorporated by notifying the intention to grant community occupation via a lease of council land, and invite Kathy Diva-Todd, Manager for Parks and Reserves, and Aaron Phillips, the Activity Manager for Parks, to present this item.
Good morning, councillors. We'll take the report as read, and you've had a very comprehensive presentation on this earlier in the day. There's just a couple of matters I just want to raise. That is in reference in the report we refer to 742 square metre area. It's actually 751 square metres, but if you were of the mind to move this lease to the next stage, then when we consult with the community, what we normally do is say more or less, because obviously as you work through the final details or something like this, that amount can change, but not materially. In terms of Bull Brown Park as a whole, this as a park is obviously a centre of a vibrant community, but we have noticed in recent years that the number of sporting events held at Bull Brown Park have actually dropped off. This provides us with an opportunity to increase the use of that park again by creating the extra facilities that might help facilitate sports outside of rugby by providing these extra club rooms. And the final thing that I think was covered off in the report, but I just want to address again here, is the Pacifica Centre, this club rooms and the car park and how those things work together on Bill Brown Park. So the activities within the two buildings are quite different and at quite different times of the day. However, because of that, then the use of the car park and the grounds is quite complementary between the two uses. And so it does actually provide us with additional capacity within the community at that location.
Councillors, I could perhaps just answer the question that was asked a little bit earlier about the lease length. On page 102 of the agenda in section 4.5 of the report, it notes that it's a 10-year lease with 2 10-year rights of renewals. The leasee decides if they wish to take advantage of those rights of renewals. So it's effectively a 30-year lease, and the Reserves Act restricts us to 33-year lengths of lease. So that hopefully that reassures you. It's a similar structure that we've used for other long-term facility developments in other parts of the city. For example, Palmerston North Boys High School had a similar lease for an artificial hockey turf that they proposed a number of years ago but have yet to construct. And otherwise, as Kathy mentioned, the presentation was you received was of a high quality, and the application was probably the highest quality application I think I've ever seen come across our desk for a new facility proposal.
Great. Open up for questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thanks, Kathy and Erin. Just in terms of pressure on car parking, I know there's already significant pressure. Would the addition of the club rooms mean that the overflow car park that we're planning would need to be bigger? As you know, what's the consideration that we've done around that?
No, it wouldn't. So the current sporting use at the grounds was one of the reasons why we proposed the overflow car parking. And as I've said, in recent years, that's actually dropped off, which is why when we've delayed the car park in the past, it hasn't been an issue. The sporting events will most likely increase with the club rooms there, but they fall at a different time to the use of the Pacifica Centre. So really the two are quite complementary, and in effect the car park asset will get better usage.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of providing adequate infrastructure underground to support that development, would that cost be on Kia Toa or is that cost on the council?
Yeah, so that will fall with Kia Toa. However, we are looking at the Pacifica Centre and saying with that proposal, if there are any things that would be joint upgrades, it will coordinate those two things together.
Okay, so in terms of costs to council, what do you anticipate?
From this proposal, we don't anticipate any cost to council, and that's been made quite clear to the applicant.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, team. I just want to ask a bit further on the lease, because what you've said around it being having 2 rights of renewal, why would we put ourselves and the tenant through the process of going through a right of renewal every 10 years when we could just grant them a lease for 30 years or 33 years as they've requested? What's our thinking there if not just doing that?
The 10 plus 10 plus 10 is in line with current council leasing policy. So you would need to make a decision which you're perfectly entitled to outside of policy, up to a maximum of 33 years.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions. Thank you very much for presenting this item. Yep. We're going to move the 2 recommendations. I'll move them from the chair, that the committee support Kia Toa Rugby Football Club Incorporated notifying a proposal to grant a community lease at 21 Havelock Avenue, part of Bull Brown Park, Palmerston North, in accordance with the Support and Funding Policy 2022 and Section 54 of the Reserves Act 1977, and 2, that the committee note the land affected by the proposed community lease to Kia Toa Rugby Football Club Incorporated is Lot 1 DP 40097 and Lot 442 DP 44423. Seconded by Councillor Naylor, and we also have a 3rd recommendation in the name of Councillor Wood, and the floor is yours if you want to speak to this.
I don't understand it, strategy and finance. Thank you, Mr Chair, and thank you to the team for putting this together and for the Kia Toa team for making this proposal. It's excellent to read, and I think it'll be a great activation of the space there. This is quite a simple additional motion. I hope it's reasonably straightforward. Given it seemed odd to me reading through this proposal, the level of investment that Kia Toa were looking at making, that they would only get a 10-year lease on the land, and it was interesting reading into the proposal that they'd actually requested as long as we could possibly give them. I don't see why we would put them through the rigmarole of going through a right of renewal process every 10 years. Not only the rigmarole it puts on them, but it does also put on our staff. So I'm very comfortable, given they're looking at making a $1.4 million investment in this space, in this circumstance being outside of council policy. And would also signal that I'm very open to reviewing that council policy, as we have a number of community organisations we work with where it seems unnecessarily administrative to put them through that process. It's not like in 10 years' time we're not going to renew their lease and ask them to demolish the building. The advice given by officers is true in that it gives the tenant the first right to request, but it does also give council an opportunity to impose new and different conditions. So it is not just a straight guarantee of a 30-year lease. Rights of renewal do also. There is an opportunity there for reconsideration. So I would rather we're clear with them. We love what you're doing and we'll give you the 33 years that you've asked for. So I hope that well, it does look like we're about to have a big debate on it. I was hoping this would be reasonably straightforward. Interested in the comments that my colleagues have.
Okay, thank you, and that's been seconded, Councillor Zebulon. I'm intending to take all three together unless requested otherwise. Councillor Johnson.
Well, I will request you to take them separately.
Okay.
So just some comments, first of all, because I don't want this excellent proposal to be derailed through a spat over the lease terms. So I just want to make some comments. First of all, I think this is a fantastic community asset that's been proposed, and I'm heartily delighted to be able to support it going out for consultation. And it also sounds to me from the preliminary work that's been done that it will be supported by the community. So I can only see that this is a benefit, not only to the club members of Kia Toa, but to the wider community in an area of town that has got limited, gathering sites indoors. So I just think it's great and well done, very well done. Secondly, on the terms of the lease, Councillor Wood may recall fairly recently that Council was in a situation where we had given I think it was a 33-year lease, and we had realised that we had kind of hamstrung ourselves by giving such a long lease. Our decision-making process had meant that we were, that we couldn't make decisions about a particular property until that lease ran up. I'm not very keen to tie the hands of future councils around a 33-year lease. We have a policy for good reason. The policy enables right of renewal, and I'd be very surprised if everything was being run well and that the project was a success, that the right of renewal wouldn't be granted. So I just think it's a little bit unnecessary to tie future councils' hands, to lock us into 33 years. What if we got into a situation where we were unhappy with how things were being run and we weren't able to resolve it with the club? I think we would want to allow the opportunity for an out. So I'm not going to support the extension to 33 years. That's not to say that I want to throw Kia Toa off after 10 years, not at all. But I do think we've got to be prudent with how we manage these things. No one can predict the future, and I think the reason that we've got 10 years with rights of renewal is there for a reason. So I'm not going to support your additional motion, Councillor Wood, although I share your enthusiasm for the project.
Thank you, Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Councillor Johnson has probably just, I suppose, stolen the thoughts that I had on it. We normally use a 10 plus 10 plus 10 lease, and as we're just going out for consultation, I think that it's premature to actually put a 33-year lease into that conversation at this point in time. And I do support Kia Toa, and I do support what the club is actually trying to do, but I just think it's premature at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McAllard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just also wanted to commend the work that's been done around this project as well. My comments are largely, largely in support of Kia Toa and the work that they're doing as well. And the level of investment that they bring into the area as well. But concerning the additional motion 3, I will not be supporting it for similar reasons that Councillor Johnson and Councillor Hancock have highlighted early on. It's basically tying future councils, and we all know the commercial sensitivity, the commercial issues that we had with previous leases, as Councillor Johnson has actually alluded to. So 33 years seems like a long time, but I would be keen to sort of like, review this probably every 10 years or so. And if we're happy with what Kia Toa is doing, not that they're doing a bad job or anything, but, and that lease can be extended further on. But to tie future councils to a 33-year lease seems to me unreasonable at this particular time and very unwise. So for that matter, I'll be voting against 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As someone that's restored hundreds of historical Kia Toa images, I certainly understand the history of this club and certainly wholeheartedly support these club rooms at a ground that's special to them. It worries me having a 33-year lease. We have a council policy for a reason. I think that also ties the hands of the club somewhat. These buildings are prefab for a reason, can be moved if need be. I would need to know that it was what the club wanted wholeheartedly. I think this whole process, having these club rooms at this park, will certainly safeguard this club for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the same light as the previous speaker, we have a policy. Kia Toa haven't made a mention of whether they want 30 years or they're happy with a 10 by 10 by 10. And I fully 100% support Kia Toa, and I think we fully understand that their process over the last number of years says they're going to be around in 30 years' time. And they're making great headways over there. But I really feel we have a policy. Nobody's going to knock them over in 10 years' time and say, thanks very much for the building, see you later. That just ain't going to work. So I believe what it is, and they will just march on and keep going. And I just wish them all the best with this massive endeavour, and fully support them. Thank you.
Thank you. And no further speakers, but Councillor Wood, I'll give you the right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion. There's just a few points I'd like to make. Firstly, that the 33 years will be part of the consultation that we go out with, so there's absolutely room for reconsideration if there was strong feedback from either Kia Toa or other community that they didn't feel that was appropriate. But Councillor Arnold and Councillor Meehan raise a fair question, is this what the club wants? And I want to be very clear, I wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't on page 120 a comment that from Kia Toa they say, ideally Kia Toa would like to have a land lease in perpetuity. However, it's understood the Reserves Act 1997 only allows a maximum of 33 years. That being the case, Kia Toa requests a lease term of 33 years with rights of renewal subject to there being no issues of performance with these lease terms. So that's the reason that I'm putting this forward, because it's an explicit request from Kia Toa in their submission for this, with the opportunity to provide rights of renewal beyond the 33-year period. I also asked Kia Toa a question here earlier, whether or not they would like a longer term, and they said the longer the better, was my recollection from earlier. So I hope that answers your question on whether or not this is what the club is looking for. On the question of tying future council's hands, I'm hesitating to say too much, because I believe that item that Councillor Johnson referred to was considered in part 2. I would say it was a very, very different nature to what we're discussing here. I can't say any more than that, but I hope councillors can understand what I'm referring to. This is about a community sports facility that they are investing $1.4 million in on council land. I think to suggest that we need an opportunity for an out is incredibly off-putting to the club who's sitting here today, that council needs to give ourselves an escape route. There's resource consents that go alongside this. There's liquor licensing that go alongside this. If they were in breach of resource consent conditions or any other things, that would be dealt with through the appropriate process. But I don't think we run any risk in providing a 33-year lease to a community sports facility. I don't think we need an out, and I frankly think that that is very very off-putting to the organisation here. The risk of this is exceptionally low. Given it is what the club has explicitly requested, I hope councillors can support this. We breach our policies all the time. In fact, we're about to go into annual budget process, we're in breach of our policy for a rates increase. So I think we can't be so inflexible that we can't consider when we've got a particularly good proposal on a particularly safe and low risk sports facility, and when it is the desire of the people making such a significant investment to do so, I think that there are grounds here for us to go outside of our usual policy. So I hope councillors can support this.
Thank you. What we're going to do, so we're clear, is we're going to vote on 3 as it's been separated first. Invite a vote. That's passed, 7 votes for and 4 against. That moves us to recommendations 1 and 2. Just display the vote. Okay, and we're going back to recommendations 1 and 2 and invite a vote. And that is passed unanimously, 11 votes for. That concludes item 12. That moves us to item 13, which is the quarterly, and thank you, Kia toa, for presenting today. Thank you. That moves us to item 13. Pardon me? I'm at 11. That moves us to the quarterly performance and financial report period ending 31st of December 24, and invite Scott Manser, Manager of Finance, and John Aikens, Manager Project Management Office, to present this item. Floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou. Very pleased to be bringing the second quarter report to the committee today. Very much business as usual report this time, and council is currently 1.5 million favourable to budget as at the 31st of December. Following the previous committee meeting in November, we've incorporated the additional resolutions that were passed and hopefully taken on some feedback through questionings regarding forecasting as well. So that's included in this report. We've got some pressures that are starting to become a bit visible in this report, particularly utilities, parking revenue, and capitalised remuneration and overheads, as we've previously mentioned. Some of these variances are expected to continue until the end of the year. Officers have updated the end-of-year forecast, and it's included in the report for the first time, as I mentioned. At the end of December, we're forecasting a slight overspend of 300,000 at 30th of June. That's not including net interest and rates revenue. I'll pass over to John to discuss the updated capital report.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko John Aiken Tokuinga, the Manager of the Project Management Office. In terms of capital delivery so far this financial year, we're fairly consistent with our same position in the last financial year, and you'll see that to date at the end of quarter 2, we've spent 82.4% of the forecasted delivery compared to 80.5% for the previous financial year. So fairly consistent. There are some future works that haven't been included, such as the emergency works on Kahutarawa Road and Atawhai Road, which will also be addressed. And throughout this report, we've also looked to take on some feedback from the previous quarter report and include further reporting from our new project management tool. So you'll see imagery, you'll see charts and diagrams showing what the spend has been allocated to in terms of project delivery. Also, there is a case study showing particular effort that went into the renewal of Railway Road recently, as an example of capital delivery that we have done throughout this previous quarter. We also report on project locations, showing where the investment is occurring across our city, and that's split down by respective infrastructure groups as well. This also helps with other services planning their subsurface services such as gas, telecommunications and electricity. There's also a short look into what's expected to be progressed over Q3 in terms of projects that are currently underway and forecast spend. That's it from me, pending any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My questions are around the attachment 3, which is the performance report. Let me see where it is. Quarterly performance and financial report on the on that attachment. Are you happy to take questions on that?
Yes, I'm happy. However, I'll
Or
probably
you'll direct them out to
defer
the
to
relevant
the
person.
appropriate.
Okay, so the first question is about the significant drop-off in numbers to Freiburg Pool. So that has been flagged as something unexpected, and there's a comment that staff will look into it. But I wondered, you know, given that we're now nearly at the end of February, if there was any insight into that.
I'll defer that one over to Kathy Devittod, our manager, Parks and
Kathy Devittod, Manager Parks and Reserves. We've had a look at the reports and it seems to be just consistently lower each month. Seems to be no particular trend that's causing that at the Freiburg Pool associated with the pool itself. So we can only assume it's something external.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the fatal and serious injury crashes, where there's been an increase in, and we're not having a decrease as we would like to see, have we got any insight into why that has happened? Is it within the variance that we'd expect, or is it some kind of trend?
I'll pass that one to our GM of Infrastructure.
Love to be able to provide some amazing insights into that. Unfortunately, we have no one from Transport here today, but look, I'm not aware of anything in particular that we're aware of apart from the raw numbers, but we can come back and provide a little bit more commentary on that.
Okay, I mean, if we could just look at that and see whether there's any kind of pattern or it's focused in one particular place or whatever, that I think that will be helpful.
Yeah, so I can definitely say we don't have anything like that. We haven't found any particular trends or what have you, but I can ask the question again and come back to see if there's anything in particular.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got a couple of questions, one of which I'll just touch on a little bit of Councillor Johnson's question as well. Just on page 133 is the red, amber and green report. And there are 5 listed projects there which are NZTA funded, which are showing in red. Do we have any more detail in respect of those projects, please?
So these projects relate to the unfunding of the NZTA. So those particular projects, won't go ahead. With the remaining, are you asking about the remaining other projects under that list too?
Yeah, please, thank you.
So there's a variety of different barriers and roadblocks that these projects have come through, and that's under review by the project teams, project governance, to make sure that delivery can get back on track. There were concerns, particularly on the Awapuni Community Hub design, around reduction in funding for that, and then rescoping to suit something that would best suit and the remainder are being looked at as well in terms of delivery for this year. Thank you.
So in respect to those last 4 that are listed on that page, are we going to expect some reports come back to the various committees and council for those? And if so, when?
Depending on the scale of the project and the financial impact, there may be reports coming back through, and I'll need to go back and confirm when they come through. Some of those projects identified as red can be temporarily reported and then corrected by things like program funds transfers, etc. So they may only be temporarily red for a moment.
Okay.
I'll refer to Chris Dryburgh.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, Councillor, just to add to that, we do have a briefing that we're pulling together for the 12th of March, I believe, and one of the things that we'll be doing is reporting back on a few property projects which will include the Puni Hub, and from that we'll give you a few insights into basically what we're going to be suggesting around the delivery of that project, which isn't really a problem, but it's a different way of delivering it, which may well mean we spend the money in a different way. So we'll be giving you some insights into that shortly.
Yep, thank you. And just while we're just to go back and just recap on the NZTA funded projects that are now no longer going to occur because of government withdrawal of funding. So are those all safety projects that we were hoping to achieve for the city?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. The next question I've just got, which goes on from Councillor Johnson's question around road safety. I note in the report there, page 153, that some of the data may not necessarily be uploaded from the crash analysis system of NZTA. So when is that likely to be updated, and will we be doing any further analysis on that, please?
I think we'll have to go away and get the answer to that question for you.
Sorry, I was working on this question. What was the question?
The question is reference on page 153 there, just when it talks about the increase in fatal and serious crashes.
Yep.
In the serious crash area, we've got 1 cyclist and 2 pedestrians, but there's a note there which says that some data may not have been uploaded yet from the crash analysis system, which is what NZTA used to track all of this information. When are we likely to see an update of that, and are we going to do any further analysis on that data, please?
Yes, I don't know when the information comes through, but definitely we'll look at that as part of answering the other question as well. So we'll dig into that a little bit more, and we'll come back to you.
Yep, thank you, Chris. And my final question is just really around footpaths, and I think that's on page 153 as well. Do we have an understanding of the quantum in terms of investment that might be needed in future years? We're showing that we've got a significant investment.
We're still looking through the information there for the upcoming financial year and doing our planning accordingly. So we don't have a firm number in terms of quantum of spend on footpaths as yet.
Okay.
What I can say, it is a very big number. It's a very big number, and and I guess that's part of the challenge, and I guess it's good that we're doing some investment this year, but it will only just scratch the very worst of the issues. It's certainly not going to be like fixing things. We'll need to put significant investment over quite a period of time. So that's probably not very useful. I'm not giving you numbers, but it is a big challenge.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Chair.
We'll come back. We'll come back on that too.
Thank you.
Councillor Zebulon.
Thank you, kia ora kōrua. Random assortment of questions. One was also about the fatal crash measures, and there's a comment there that notes that we don't have control over poor driver behaviour. We only have control over the road environment, and we have much less control of that now. So I'm just wondering what your view is on how useful this is as a performance measure, or someone's view.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I probably can't necessarily comment on the usefulness of a performance measure, but it is one of the mandatory performance measures that we're required to report through the DIA.
Right, Thank you, that's helpful. I also had a question about Freiburg Pool, which we note was down 17% in comparison to last year. Is that per the same quarter, or is that year-to-date totals?
Back to the mic.
Thank you.
Perhaps just wait for the mic, Kathy. Yeah, just perhaps we will use the mic, Kathy. Thank you.
It is the year-to-date totals.
Thank you. So I just noted that in the previous quarterly report from November 2024, that the stats there were down 19%. So, and that's just a continuation of that?
Yes, it is. So, in effect, the 19% first 3 months, the 17 is the 6 months, so we have made some recovery.
Great, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask about the community funding satisfaction decline there and how that's measured, and whether we have any idea whether it's satisfaction related to too much funding or not enough funding.
Do you have a page reference? Sorry, just so I can...
I'll dig that up and I'll find it. Moving on, there's a funding update at page 140, and the last 2 paragraphs there are about the challenges of the current funding environment. And that doesn't seem to bode too well for our library or Te Manawa co-funding pieces. And since that was one of the key uncertainty pieces in our audit opinion, can you tell us a bit more about how that's forecasting for those 2 pieces in particular?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but I do know that we have done some initial work on it, but no real ability to alter that forward-looking forecast.
Okay.
Through Mr. Chair, can you just repeat for me the 2 areas that you're referring to? Sorry, I missed that. The 2 areas that you mentioned around the co-funding.
Yeah, that was for the library and Te Manawa.
Yep, so haven't really got an update for you at the current point in time. It's certainly something that's on our minds. But yep, that will be quite a sizable piece of work to determine that, and I think we'll be bringing back our findings on that specifically as time progresses.
Okay, thank you. I've got page number now. We're on page 159, and that is performance measure 4 there, which was about user and community feedback. And it just noted that community support for community, or satisfaction with community funding and support for community groups has declined. And so I just wondered whether that was we're doing too much or perhaps too little, or do we not know?
I think we might have to take that one away and come back to you on that one.
Great, thank you. And just 2 more, which are about the water measures, and I'll have to find that page, but it was water measure 2 and water measure 3. One was about the bacterial compliance or lack of bacterial compliance due to chlorine contact times at several locations. Are those the locations where we are intending to install UV filters, and how many locations are we talking about?
I'll pass that one over to our Waters Manager, Mike.
Monaghan, Manager for Waters. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, you're quite correct that it's at several locations. It's our bore sites, our city bores. The current standards which are under review, to get compliance for bacterial standards, you need to have this thing called contact time, which involves reservoirs, which we don't have at those sites. So what we're doing at the moment is we're looking at the strategy of whether we can overcome that by using UV as a treatment, or whether in fact the standards will change to be more permissive of the city's water.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Thank you. And just the measure below that, water measure 3, which was regarding complaints. Are complaints trending upwards? Do we know? There's a note of how many complaints per 1,000 connections, but are we? And there's 13 complaints, but are we trending upwards in the amount of complaints we get on drinking water quality? Do we know?
To be definitive, I have to go away and have a look at that trend. I don't have that trend in front of me.
Okay, great, thank you. And that's all from me.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm on page 144 and it's about menacing dogs or roaming dogs. Is there an update on that? And the other one was about noise control. Both of them are aren't at satisfaction level, so I just wondered if there was any update on that. Don't know who we're looking at.
Kia ora, Kerry Lee Probert, Development and Regulatory General Manager. Officers have noted the issue regarding roaming dogs and taken steps to improve our visibility. Essentially what they've done is the ACOs, Animal Control Officers, have a lot of paperwork to do, which is keeping them in the office. That's now been handed on to a pre-existing administration team so that they are less bogged down with those types of things. The other thing is that now that the shelter is open and the team leader is based at the shelter and able to keep a closer eye on the quality of care that the animals are receiving in the shelter, the kennel manager role has been changed into an ACO role, an animal control officer role, so that we now essentially have more we have an additional animal control officer, and so there should be more visibility in the community. In terms of the noise complaints, we've had a look at that data. There's the usual seasonal peaks that we expect in summer, and there are more notifications, but we're not seeing an increase in noise found. So in other words, when the officers are going out to site, they're not finding that, they're not confirming the complaint, if you like. So there is potentially a perception issue as opposed to a change in statistics.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple from me. Firstly, page 125 at the dashboard. The fees and charges, 7.8 million for the budget for the year. When we've had the fees and charges papers for the last couple of years, when we've asked the question of what's the total fees and charges and how much more will that be or less will that be, officers haven't been able to answer that question, and I've observed that our format for our annual budgets or our long-term plans are different to the format that we have for our quarterly reporting. At what point could we see next year, the annual budget for 25-26, at what point can we see that information, or at what point is that information available for the year going forward so that we can understand a comparator?
That's a really good question. I think it would have been in the detailed report that was presented to Council on the 12th of December, but the published budget version is at a much higher level, and that's due to the guidelines that are provided by Audit NZ around the production of those documents. We could make a note to have that figure to hand when we bring the budget back next week, I believe, if that would be of benefit.
Thank you. That would be great. And my second question's around Appendix 10 on page 196, which is the first quarterly report around the sensitive expenditure. And I've got a few questions on this. In the table 2, in the comparison to the 23-24, the far column talks about the 23-24 actual. And when I went back to the November report, it showed the actual budget for last year as being quite a bit lower than that. That was 57,000. And because the actual in a number of those areas was quite well over the budget. So I'm not quite sure who might have the answer to this question, but I'm wondering if last year's budget for that subtotal for the Mayor's Office sensitive expenditure, if last year's budget was 57, why we've almost doubled it for this year to 110. It just seems quite a lot more than just our CPI sort of an increase.
So you'll recall last financial year there was some overspends on certain line items and some underspends on some others. What we did as part of the long-term plan was correct where the budget was sitting. So overall, the budget hasn't moved by a great deal, in fact, less than the CPI inflations. All we've done is correct the coding in the detailed version of the budget, and that's why the subtotal is now much higher.
Okay, Thank you. And I also note that we're well ahead of budget for the current year in terms of the that column being at 73,000 out of a budget of 110, which is well over half. If we're to what measures are being taken currently to ensure that we don't exceed that budget?
This is a timing issue. The December quarter report includes the December events, and as you'll know, there is a large number of those events, particularly through the last weeks of November and into the Christmas period. All we're seeing is that expenditure coming through, and in fact in January there's quite a lot less, so the budget obviously ticks along, whereas the actuals don't progress at the same rate. So it's a timing issue rather than we're on track to exceed the budget. If you can understand that.
Okay, so last year, when the budget was exceeded, some of us asked some questions about how that was managed or monitored to hopefully prevent that from happening. What approval processes do we have in place to ensure that that increase is still managed appropriately?
We provide a report through to the Chief Executive and an update to the Mayor each month, and we're keeping a close eye on it, and the expenditure is going through the appropriate approval process. I believe the Chair of this committee signs off the credit card expenditure, and the Chief Executive has approval over other items within there as well.
Okay, I'll leave it there, thank you.
Thank you. That exhausts questions. Thank you, gentlemen. Before we move into the recommendations in the debate or the comment section, we might adjourn for a 20-minute morning break. With the time being about 5:02, we'll reconvene at 1:15. And at that point, Councillor Naylor will resume the chair with my departure. Thank you. Oh, no, I can't move it. We'll move it. We'll move it when we reconvene.
Kia ora, colleagues, we'll reconvene. I think everyone had finished asking questions on this item, so I'd like to move the recommendation that the committee receive the memorandum titled Quarterly Performance and Financial Report Period ending 31st of December 2024 and related attachments presented to the Strategy and Finance Committee on the 26th of February 2025. And looking for a seconder, thanks, Councillor Hapata. Thanks to the officers, really good reporting as usual, and things are tracking very well. I do want to also speak to an additional recommendation which I'd like to move, which Councillor Johnson is happy to second, and that is that the Chief Executive review the elected member expense policy with a view to strengthening the approval process for expenditure, and that this be reported back to the next Strategy and Finance Committee meeting. I just acknowledge the additional appendix included in this report, which following the November report was asked for to have some more regular reporting around the sensitive expenditure, and that was really as a result of perhaps just seeing some of those increases. And in discussion with the chair, we've felt that it would be useful to have some strengthening of the approval process for that. In terms of the policy, the current policy that we have, all expenses must have a justifiable council purpose and be conservative. Whether strengthening is having a second person in the approval process or something else, but I've specifically left it broad to leave that to the Chief Executive to look at what that could look like and bring it back to us. I'll open up the floor for any other comments on on both recommendations. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just really want to briefly comment on a number of matters that I raised during question time. And I just really want to express my very, very deep concern about the withdrawal of NZTA funding for our council. It shows in our report in terms of the five projects which will no longer take place because there is no funding from NZTA for those. And those were 5 safety projects for our community. Secondly, we have, I think, a red flag around our fatalities and serious crashes. Our numbers have doubled against the corresponding period of the previous year. Within that, we know that the CAS, which is the crash analysis system, often runs behind in terms of the entry of crashes into that system. So therefore, the situation could in fact actually be worse than that has been reported in this particular report. There are 3 serious crashes. There are 3 serious crashes in this report which involve both pedestrians and also a cyclist. These are our roads, our networks, and so therefore they are our responsibility. And when you have NZTA and the government basically withdrawing funding for a lot of projects which we actually need to do to ensure that our community can travel safely around our networks, then that is of very significant concern. And the last thing I want to point to is my questioning just around the condition of our footpaths and the quantum in terms of what it will take for us to get our footpaths back up to a reasonable standard. I walk a dog, and I walk all around a large part of the city. And I tell you what, when I see the condition reports that actually come through periodically about the condition of our footpaths, I can tell you what I actually experience and what I actually see does not bear any resemblance to that report. Our footpaths are in much worse condition than what is being reported to us. And again, this goes back to the government's choice through NZTA to withdraw funding for that will support the infrastructure within our community. I am very, very unhappy about the situation, and I think the government really needs to be on notice that it is not satisfactory and we're being sold short. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think we can only deal with what we can only deal with. This report deals with what the City Council has in our funding, and I think that's what we should be concentrating on, not what we haven't got. So I feel that we should only be dealing with what our Chief Executive can deal with in our own funding, and us as a council for the City Council. So we can't actually really consider what we haven't got, because we haven't got it. At the end of the day, we have got a funding pool, and our Chief Executive, under the guidance of us as council, deals with it in the way that we have instructed him to deal with it. And that's what we should be focusing on, and that's what I think we do focus on. So, and he does a very good job. So at the end of the day, I think it's a very good report. I thank the officers for bringing it to us, and I thank them for doing that very good job, and thank you for that, and that's all I want to say, so thank you.
And the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things, just a comment and then a question back to you on number 2. So first of all, thanks to the officers around the report, quarterly report. Just on the footpaths, because I was just at a disability sector stand-up this morning, and yes, footpaths came in there, but the comment that was made to me, actually, our city's footpaths are considerably better than some other major cities. So I think we've got to take things in context as well. You just need to go to perhaps Wellington, Dunedin, parts of Auckland, and I think you'll get an understanding that Palmerston North, yes, it has its challenges and we need to do better. And that was acknowledged in my response to the sector this morning. But we can only do what we can do at this stage, and there's a balance around everything. Yes, we need more money from NZTA, that's sort of a given, but that was all colours of government, we've always got those issues. Just second one, if I could just ask you a question, Madam Chair. We already have a sign-off process. I'm just trying to understand why we're going to review that yet again. We've got a policy.
Mr Mayor, you may not have been here for the questions earlier, but as it was identified, the level of increase in that, in the expenditure, it's really about having a strength. Well, I acknowledge there is already an approval process, but it's about strengthening that approval process to ensure that it's as effective as it needs to be, given the increases that we're observing.
But the paper yes, we're actually heading the other way.
Are you wanting to make a comment now, Mr Mayor?
Okay. Yeah, I will. Thank you. Look, colleagues, this is obviously aimed directly at me and my office, and if I could just push back a little bit in the sense that there already is a process. You actually agreed to that at the start of the triennium. Management sign off on any travel or training that needs to happen. I often leave the training budget alone for you as colleagues to have some professional development. Travel, I only go when I need to go, and there has been a real call for everybody to pull back on expenses, and you'll see that budget is coming down consistently. And the same with events and all sorts of things that we do. And you've seen it. In fact, there's been some commentary that we have gone cheap on food and a few other things with civic events, etc. And we've done that on purpose because we've just pulled back around that cost of living. The Chair of Finance or the Chair of Risk and Strategy then sign off those expenses. I understand there were some questions about me coming back from when I was away on holiday. I didn't want to come back, but a minister called me to front a meeting of building owners, construction and earthquake-prone building owners, and I was in Tauranga and I just had to get back here. And I didn't want to come, so I broke my holiday and I came back for that. If that's what I'm getting hung on, then I just find it really strange while we're trying to stop me from doing my job. But I'll abstain from voting because it is concerning my office, but I just think it's a bit of overreach from individuals. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you. I just wanted to put in my thanks for a very thorough and very interesting report. And I wanted to touch on the footpaths as well, because I have raised that in the past and I do have concerns about that, because just in my term I've watched our rating slide from sort of above where we wanted to be to quite below where we wanted to be. And even though we have topped up that budget, we are really just dealing with that remedial work and maintenance, but there is the major underlying issue, literally underlying, of tree roots and the increasing damage that they are causing. And as far as I can see, that's put in the too hard basket. I don't really see that we have a plan there or that we're making any progress in working on that. I think a survey every couple of years and topping up a dwindling budget doesn't really touch the sides of that particular problem. And just like to put that on the table. I think that we need to start working that in as well. That's actually all I wanted to say, so thanks for the report.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say briefly, to give you a right reply about my thinking on item 2, and I will ask that that's taken separately, is, I mean, I'm all for controlling budgets and managing down expenditure, but my belief is that we do that in the annual budget process. So if your intention is that we need to reduce the available budget for the Mayor's office, then I'm very happy to look at that through the annual budget. But the reason, as far as I heard from your opening statement given, for why we would increase this approval process is to manage down budget lines, then I would just rather do that at the appropriate time of doing it rather than increasing processes. So I'm going to vote against it, not that I'm not open to the idea of reducing budgets, but as the Mayor's alluded to, I've been to a number of community and civic events where I think about the Civic Awards dinner. The first year I was here, it was a dinner. Now it's a sit down and you have something to eat afterwards. I think about a number of events we held. It appears to me anyway that work is being done to reduce this expenditure. You can see in the budget the total controllable expenditure in 23-24 was 181,000 versus 134,000 in 24-25. So as far as I can see, unless I'm reading the numbers wrong, there is work being done to control this expenditure. So I'm happy to relook at it when we get to the annual budget process, but I'm not going to support this here today.
Thank you. I think that's all the speakers. So what we'll do is we'll take the second recommendation first, but I will quickly have a right of reply, just given the comments that have been made. No, this recommendation is not an attempt to change the budget. I acknowledge that that budget has been set and that's at an operational level. I think when we did the annual budget, we didn't have quite the detail that far down to understand how much of the budget was specifically around the sensitive expenditure, but acknowledge that that has more than nearly doubled from the 57,000 that was budgeted last year to 110 this year. But my reason for this recommendation is not around trying to change the budget. It's about my desire to operate within the budget, and given that the budget is 110,000 this year and that 73,000 has already been spent, in discussion with the chair of this committee and just seeing the trends, we felt that it was appropriate to look at the approval process. And just to give a little bit more understanding to elected members around the approval process only happens retrospectively through the chair of finance or the chair of audit and risk for the credit card statement after the money has been spent. Before money has been spent, that happens through the chief executive, and it's just the one person approving that. So strengthening the approval process may look like perhaps a second person approving that. But the policy does say that the fundamental principle underlying it is that the spending of public money should be subject to the standards of probity, transparency and financial prudence and able to withstand public scrutiny. So whilst it's not necessarily that comfortable to talk about this in here and it's a sensitive issue, I think it is our responsibility as elected members to ensure that all the processes in place do ensure that moderate and conservative
application of the policy that exists there. So in light of that, I would encourage you to support that. Now happy to vote. Voting just on recommendation 2 first. So that's failed, 6 votes to 4 with 1 abstention, and then we'll move to recommendation 1, if all can vote on that. And that's passed 11 votes to 0. Thank you. And we're going to move to item 14, the Treasury Report on page 199, and invite Steve Patterson. Thank you.
Madam and elected members, the report, from my perspective, is one that stands on its own. There's nothing particular I need to draw to your attention this quarter. Just answer any questions you have.
Opening up for questions. Don't appear to be any, so thank you, Steve. Given that there's no questions, I'm happy to move the recommendation of the committee note the performance of Council's Treasury activity for the 6 months ending 31st of December 2024, and would invite someone to second that. Councillor Wood. My only comment about that is that it's really pleasing for the first time in a while that the debt is now tracking under the projected debt rather than over, so I find that a little bit more comfortable to see that that's come back within the projections. And aside from that, a good thorough report. Thank you. Any other comments? If there's no other comments, we'll go to the vote. And that's passed 11 votes to 0. And then we're just moving to item 15, which is on page 211. No, it's not. 211. No. Is it 311? Oh, okay. Thank you. And we'll invite Aaron Phillips to come and speak to this. Thank you.
Morning, Madam Chair, Mayor and Councillors. I cut that a little bit fine and I just walked in time. This is wrapping up the reserve classification process that we've been out consulting on. We didn't get an awful lot of submissions, but we did get some suggestions from the community that perhaps we reconsider some of our proposed classifications. We've taken that on board and had a little bit of think about those suggestions and agreed with a couple of the submissions, and suggest that Macraes Bush and Ashurst and Breslow Park towards Massey University changed from our proposed classification of recreation to Scenic B under the Reserves Act. Of note, you'll see in the report discussion around the land at Atifai Road or Atifai Park in relation to Massey University. That was an error on our part, not identifying that issue early enough to capture it before the proposal went out to the community. But there is a land ownership issue that needs resolving there and Massey University have proposals around land sales involved. And we think that the Edify Park area and the associated walkway should be withdrawn from this process until it can be considered a little bit more holistically with those other matters at the time. And we can't, in fact, classify a piece of land that Massey University own as well. So a mistake on our part, irony being that I live across the road from there. Edwards Pit Park, the suggestion that we reclassify that to scenic reserve. It's a little bit one of those ones where you could go either way. On balance, we thought leave it as recreation. We don't believe it'll affect the way we look after that reserve and work with the community group that have been advocates of that space for the last 20 to 25 years. Just that we think the slightly more flexible recreation and reserve status might allow for different activities in the future if the change happened. So yeah, open to any questions.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Aaron. I just had two questions. One was about the Mangotane Reserve, and just wondering whether or not there were any implications for the existing planting work or future planting work with a classification for stormwater.
Yes, it'll be a balancing act for us for most of the gullies in Akautri that we, as you've gone through with the recent Akautri plan change for the urban growth area, there's a lot more focus on understanding and managing stormwater than perhaps there had been in the past. And the stormwater team is going to need to put in a lot more stormwater detention and treatment devices within the gullies than perhaps they had in the past. There's some risk in some gullies may need to move some planting or alter them accommodate stormwater needs, but we think it's important that stormwater take priority and that our planting work and recreation access works around that as secondary purposes. We'll always endeavour to do the best we can with planting and avoid having to backtrack and have a little bit of egg on our face if we need to follow a new stormwater direction that we hadn't been aware of. But that, yeah, it's kind of a case of managing it as we go with that one.
Thank you. And we, I presume that we'll be working with Green Corridors collaboratively to manage those kind of future plans?
Yes, yeah, they're a wonderful community group, so active in that area, so we'll need to keep them well engaged if there's any change required. Yeah.
Thank you. And just for Edwards Pit Park, for the future planning element of that park, to what extent is there appetite or intention to put additional training or event space in there, noting, you know, Skoglund Park's right there and additional pits? Is there intention or aspiration for communities to be more flexible about the use of it?
No, there's not. There's no current plans to change anything that's happening there at all. I just, when reflecting on it, I had noted the early plans for that park had included an event space and a training field, and those have gone by the wayside in the interim over the last 15 or 20 years. But we thought perhaps retaining the more flexible classification status might enable change in the future if it did come forward, but with nothing in any plans at all. Yeah.
So we'd retain that flexibility, but this classification wouldn't change the activities that already happen there in terms of restoration?
No, and you'll get the opportunity through the Omnibus Reserve Management Plans when we get to that stage of this quite lengthy process. Edwards Pit Park would fall under the special character reserves categories, and at that stage you could also provide clear direction if you wished on how we envision the future of those reserves and their management.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That concludes questions. Thanks, Aaron. So I'm happy to move the recommendations. I won't read them all as it's quite lengthy, but it's as it is in your agenda. Just looking for a seconder. Thanks, Councillor Hapeta. And open for comment. If there's no comment, we'll go to a vote. And that's passed 11 votes to nil. So moving on to speed limit reversals, item 16 on page 281. I'll invite Peter Ridge and James McGuell.
Kia ora koutou. We'll take this report as read, particularly for the specifics and the technical details that we've outlined in the report. What I would just like to emphasise, though, is this is a report we're bringing to you because it is a mandatory requirement under the new speed limits rule. We have no reasonable practical alternatives except to reverse the speed limits that have been identified in the report. So this applies to Tennant Drive and Railway Road. These are both roads which fit the classifications that are identified in the speed limits rule that have to be reversed by 1 July this year. So we've got James McGill here. We're happy to take questions about any of those specific elements of the reversals. I don't think there's anything else more to add except to say that we'll be progressing the process in the timeline that's outlined in the report.
Thank you. And a question from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, James and Peter. In terms of the Railway Road speed change, there was very strong community support for the lowering of the speed limit on Railway Road, particularly following fatal accidents. So is there no clause anywhere where a speed limit was lowered because of fatal accidents that we're obliged to reduce it, to reverse it back up to the speed it was before?
So the rule as it's written doesn't give us any discretion. We must return it to the speed limit that applied as of 31 December 2019. Even if it would be unsafe under the new rule. This has been discussed with colleagues and with the NCTA around the country. Council, after it has reversed the speed limit by 1 July, can then create a new speed limit. So it can reverse the reversal, which is, we acknowledge is a very bizarre situation, but the rule's very clear that there's no alternative but to return it to the speed limit that was existing on the 31st of December 2019.
I must admit, I'm struggling to follow the logic of this. Why was the date in December 2019 picked? What's the significance of that date?
Again, I can't speak to that. That's come directly from the Minister of Transport at the time. The rule that we currently operate under was made in 2024. The vast majority of the speed limit changes that were the focus of the election campaign in 2023, the central government elections, were made under the 2022 rule. And when we submitted on the proposed speed limit rule, we did note that the period that they were applying this to predated the 2022 rule. It goes back to 2020. So I can't speculate as to why they've picked that date, but it does capture speed limit changes we made back in 2020.
Okay, so we've got no choice that we have to reverse these, but then do we go straight into a process of reconsultation about changing them back again?
So as we indicated in the report, we have a councillor workshop scheduled for 12th of March, now it's 19th of March, and the purpose of that workshop is to outline a speed management planning process. So there are some things that we must do. These speed limit reversals are the first thing, but the next thing we have to do is implement variable speed limits around schools by 1 July next year. What we are proposing is a process to go through a planning for speed limit changes, including those variable speed limits for schools, and setting out some options for elected members to discuss.
I anticipate there might be quite a lot of community strength of feeling about this. Do we need to have some plan laid out to reassure people with? I feel that if I respond to say, oh, don't worry, we're having a workshop about it, that probably won't be adequate.
In order to change the speed limits, to take an example, if the speed limit changes for Railway Road are reversed as we're proposing, and councillors were of mind to undo that reversal and return it to the speed limit it currently is, council still has to go through a consultation process. It can't make a decision to simply reverse the speed limit. So to set a speed limit
other than this reversal, we're required to go through a consultation process as if we were making a speed management plan.
And the costs of all of this are on us again.
Correct.
Okay, I'll save the rest for comment.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, most of my questions have been asked, but just to clarify, I understand that there was an evidence-based rationale for the speed limit reductions. Is there an apparent evidence-based rationale to increase the speed limits under this rule?
Not on any specific road. As I said, this direction has come straight from the Minister of Transport through the new speed limits rule. So there's no obligation to conduct any consultation or gather any evidence to support the returning of the speed limit. It's just a blanket rule to return the speed limit to its higher level.
Thank you. Paragraph 3.1 says council has very little discretion with regards to the mandatory reverse speed limit changes. Very little discretion, or is it none at all?
I put very little in there quite deliberately because there is a tiny little bit of discretion. So the rule describes certain classifications of roads where the reversals must apply. It's up to the council to decide what roads meet those classifications. So our attachment in the report goes through and identifies all the roads where the speed limit changed in 2021 and what those roads would be classified under the new rule. So the roads which are classified as urban connectors, for instance, must be reversed. If council were of a mind to classify it differently, then they would not be subject to the reversal. But that's the classification that we believe fits best.
Thank you. And just finally, you noted in your report that the tenant drive change would it in fact be in breach of the new rule because it's shorter than the minimum 700 metre stretch, is that correct?
Yes, so the rule does outline minimum distances, but it also then has a clause that allows it to get around that functionally, and that's what NZTA pointed us to. So what we're pointing to, that within the space of 500 metres, you have the speed limit go from 50 to 60 to 70. That's assuming you're heading up to Summerhill Drive. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we know what the desired outcome of these changes are? Is there a stated objective from NZTA or from the Minister?
Again, I hesitate to speak for the Minister. This was an issue that came through the general election campaign, and the coalition government was very clear on its intention to undo many of the speed limit changes that were made, but I couldn't speculate as to its overall outcome or purpose.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent report.
Thank you. A couple of questions from me. In 3.4, it talks about that NZTA has confirmed that even if there is demonstrated community support or if the previous speed limit is unsafe, the council must still reverse the speed limit. So are any of the ones that are in our report to change, would you consider that the previous speed limit or the speed limit that we're changing it back to, do you consider any of those as being unsafe?
So in the time frame we had to do this, we weren't able to do a proper traffic impact assessment. But if you look at section 4, we noted what we observed to be kind of some of the key risk areas. So particularly, as already mentioned, the intersection around Roberts Line, there were some fatalities a few years ago from that. You've also got El Prado Drive. There's some issues already with the level of service provided there. Increasing the speed might increase the risk there for vehicles pulling out. And likewise on Tennant Drive, in particular around the end to Massey, you get a lot of traffic in the afternoon to pull out of there. So what you might find is people more likely to take risks because it's more difficult for them to pull out. So.
Okay, thank you. And the other question was 5.2, where it talks about the that there's no specific program to fund any of this work, that funding will likely need to come from the transport operational budget. And I'm just wondering what, if we're needing to use an extra 10,000 from the transport operational budget, what is it that we won't be able to do as a result of that?
I might refer this one to Chris to answer.
I'd need to check with the team and come back to you.
Okay.
But I think it comes from a budget that would cover like lots and lots of different bits and pieces.
Okay, thank you. Question from Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, team. There's a strange incongruity here that NZTA's rural connected roads need to have their speed limits restored, but council's rural connected roads don't. Do you have any understanding of why that is?
I don't know about James, but I can't speculate as to why NZTA have made that particular distinction.
So on page 291, I appreciate that you've identified the roads that we have to make a reduction on. The second from the bottom, Tennant Drive from Prendergast Road to State Highway 57 was lowered from 100 kilometres an hour to 80 kilometres an hour. If we wanted to, theoretically, could council choose to put that back up to 100, or because it doesn't meet the requirements of what's being put forward to us by NZTA, does that have to go through a separate consultation process?
Yeah, so it's not covered under this reversals process because it's not an urban connector. It's a rural connector, I believe. The process, therefore, to revert that to 100 kilometres per hour would be the same as if we were setting a new speed limit. And as mentioned for the previous comment, we would have to go through a full consultation process on that.
Right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks both. Most of my questions have been asked, but I see the recommendation actually asks us to confirm whether or not this is something that we actually want to do. That seems strange, given the rest of the narrative says that we don't have any choice. So, what if we don't confirm?
Yeah, this is a good question, and there has been some discussion amongst officers around whether this is a decision of council or not. I guess the position I've taken here is that it is still a decision, even if there is only one practical option here. The decision effectively lies in the way we've classified the roads. So that is the discretion, and pretty much the only discretion left to council. The fact of reversing the speed limits isn't a choice, but which speed limits and which roads are affected is decided by us in terms of how we've applied that classification. So I think, excuse me, that's why I think this is a recommendation to confirm what we've set out for you, and for that information to be sent through to NZTA.
Sorry, that doesn't give me any further direction, really. We're saying on one hand we've got, I'll say that for comment. The next question I've got here is really, I guess we find ourselves in a position where we're having to reverse speed changes which are from the current government. And to set that up during the during the election period, the soon-to-be government talked about increasing speed limits back up to get the country moving, get the country back on track. Is there any evidence to suggest that these increased speed limits are actually going to improve productivity for the nation?
I can't speak, similar to Peter's comments, I can't speak directly to the central government's direction around this. There is, I guess, evidence to say that some speed limits, the answer is a bit more complex than a simple yes or no, because functionally, if you think about long distance travel, yes, you might gain speed on a rural road where the speed limit increases, but as soon as you hit an urban environment, as soon as you hit traffic, you might lose all that speed savings. So it's hard to give a clear-cut answer behind that.
Thank you. I'll save the rest of the comment. Thank you. Cheers.
One further question from me. If this committee chooses not to move this recommendation or support it today, what's the consequence of that?
Possibly would be a question better posed to legal counsel, but speaking somewhat, we've had some conversations with our legal advisor, so I do have some idea on this. If council was to make no decision on this and we were not to advise NZTA of any changes to the speed limits, technically, in many practical ways, we would be in breach of the law. So we're looking here for a recommendation from the committee to council to confirm what we take to NZTA. If we have no direction from the council to take that information to NZTA, we're left without direction. So what we're looking for here is a confirmation of the direction we're taking.
Thank you. And question from the Mayor. Is that not working?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Peter and James, so on 2.4 in your class of street, what your advice to us is what you deem these roads are all these roads deemed urban connectors?
So the roads which we are including in the reversals are all defined by classification as urban connectors.
So who makes that? You? That decision? You?
So James
does.
Yep.
So we made that determination based upon the classifications that were given to us in the setting a speed limit rule. So I'll note that those classifications were unique to the rule, and so they ignored the One Network framework. So that's how we normally classify our roads. They effectively, in the rule, created a new classification for roads, and so based upon the description, that's what we classified the roads as.
But my question to you is, Tennant Drive and Summerhill Drive are actually transit corridor roads, and Railway Road is a rural connector. If you go to their rationale, and they are exempt, am I correct? Are transit corridor roads and rural connector roads exempt? Just a yes or no would be nice.
Yeah, rural connector roads are exempt for local roads, and then transit corridors are required to be reversed.
So your report is incorrect here.
Sorry.
Just to add some clarification there, so Table 1 identifies the classes of street that must be reversed. So for the council, as a road controlling authority, we must reverse speed limits on the local streets that meet the criteria, urban connectors, transit corridors, and interregional connectors. We don't have to do rural connectors because it only applies to NZTA.
Okay, so I'm sorry, you're adding more confusion into it, Peter. So transit corridors, so the report's not correct then. So, and the interregional connector, it says, it says applies to Palmerston North, no.
It doesn't apply to us because we haven't identified any roads that fit that definition.
Okay, that's where I'm trying to tease out. If we didn't accept your advice and said we believe Tennant Drive and Summerhill Drive are a transit corridor, which technically they're urban motorways and corridors that provide movement of people and goods within an urban environment, and Railway Road is a rural connector providing a link between rural road and intertown, interregional connections, they are exempt from this.
That's incorrect. If we classify them as a transit corridor or an interregional connector, they are still subject to a reversal.
Okay, so the only way out of this is to call them all rural connectors?
Yeah. Correct.
So, okay, I'll have an additional recommendation.
Councillor Johnson.
I was heading in the same direction as the Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Wood.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me jump back in. In light of the Mayor's comments, legally, can we just arbitrarily call roads what we want, or would NZTA push back against that?
So part of the process, there is an expectation that NZTA, I guess, effectively audits how council classify these roads. How they do that, I'm not sure. That's not quite clear. So they may challenge the decision to reclassify them as rural connector, but I can't speak for NZTA's processes because I think it's still an emerging thing for them.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that exhausts the questions. Now, I'm just going to ask if there is anyone from the committee who wishes to move either of these recommendations. Nothing's been moved and seconded. Or has anyone got an alternate recommendation they would like to move? Mr. Mayor, over to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, very simply, I would like to take them separately because they're likely to get challenged, but that's okay. We're playing or meeting fire with fire. So if we could, number 1A, that we don't reverse the speed limits along the Tennant Drive and Summerhill Drive.
Mr. Mayor, is your seconder happy with the wording that you've got, or can we pass?
So before you comment, Councillor Johnson, all I want to do is just change that we don't change the speed limits because we identify them as rural connector roads on both A and B. And
Okay.
we'll test that.
So we'll just get that, perhaps we'll just pause for a moment, we'll get that correct wording up, and then we'll go, wait. Perhaps we'll just pass to Councillor Johnson to speak while we're just getting that wording.
Apologies, Madam Chair, and it is a bit unorthodox, but just to the mover, if I could suggest that we don't mention speed limit reversals at all, because if we reclassify these roads, they're not subject to speed limit reversals, and therefore we're not denying the instruction to reverse speed limits. We can just say that council...
We identify them as rural connector roads.
And then we don't have to enter into the discussion about we've refused to reverse the speed limits. We just say, well, we're reclassifying them as these sorts of roads, and therefore we don't have to go on to say, but we understand, obviously, that they would not be subject to speed limit reversals. So, because otherwise it looks like a direct challenge to the instruction. That's my thinking.
And I can sense the nervousness of some people around the room as well, so that's... Okay, so if I could speak to this, Madam Chair. So that council classify Tennant Drive and its bypasses, etc., and the lower part of Summerhill Drive and Railway Road as rural connector roads. So councillors and colleagues, some of this just doesn't make sense, and I sense that probably in government and officials it probably doesn't make sense as well. I do wonder with the new minister now that some of these things are perhaps a hangover from a former minister's instructions. Look, Railway Road, it just does not make sense, especially does not make sense to reverse what has seen deaths, cyclists killed there. I can recall a colleague at the Palmerston Squash Club getting killed on biking, used to bike in from Bunnythorpe, and he got killed because of that 100. It's a very, very narrow road there, and it is actually a rural connector in a true sense. So I challenge the officers a little bit in the sense of what they're identifying them as. And in terms of Tennant Drive, majority of that is rural as well, if you want to get technical about it. So I think, and Summerhill Drive connects the rural environment as well. So we can, I suppose we can look to how we can manage this. It's probably going to get challenged, I know that, but I think we should be standing up to what we feel is best for the city and the city environment.
And look, if we can get success on all of this, that is fantastic. If we can get success on part of this, that's fantastic as well. Railway Road especially is a rural connector. And I just want to go to the officers. I don't know why we've put it as something else. So, yeah, I hope you can support this and we'll just see where it goes. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Look, it's like a Star Trek moment, isn't it? We've found a third way. But seriously, I agree with the Mayor. This is really about us standing up for the community. If government has put some kind of blanket rule on that doesn't take into account our community, the fact that people asked us for these speed changes, I'll never forget the really compelling submissions we had from the friends and relatives of the doctors who were killed on Railway Road. I mean, that was really tough stuff to listen to. I don't think we want to be in a position of just caving in. If there's an alternative means, and I accept it might be a little weaselly, but if there is an alternative means of circumventing this directive, that really is in the best interest of our people and our communities, I don't see why we wouldn't do it. And I'm quite happy to put my name to it. I'm not nervous at all. In fact, I think we'd be doing the wrong thing if we agreed to this. Quite the wrong thing. I just remind people that when you took your oath, you agreed to act in the best interest of the community, not in the best interest of the government.
Thank you. I'll just say a few words at this point. Certainly when I read this paper, the only way I could describe this requirement was quite stupid. And so I appreciate the Mayor and Councillor Johnson perhaps finding an alternate way forward today. It did quite remind me of children playing silly games, and when the outcome may actually compromise safety for our community, I think it is appropriate for us to look a little bit outside of the box about how we'd like to address this. So I'm very happy to support this recommendation. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, this is nuts. We can't just act illegally on purpose. We can't just decide to call objectively urban roads rural roads because it fits our interests. I agree with the councillors that Railway Road probably is a step too far, and very happy for, as soon as we've changed it, to go into a consultation process with the community to put it back down to the speeds that are there. But we can't, in the spirit of good decision making, which so many councillors sit in this chamber talk about, intentionally lie to NZTA. I mean, the term Weasley was used. It's a bit like Blackadder. We've got a cunning plan, so cunning we could pin a tail on it and call it a fox, except our cunning plan is that we're just going to make something up. I just can't support this, councillors. Tennant Drive is an urban connector. It goes through Massey. There's mass amounts of businesses out there. There's accommodation. There's a whole number of things. This will get challenged. This will then cost us to either go through this process again or to face legal challenge because of it, when there is already a process outlined that if council and councillors wanted to put those speed limits back up, we can do that. All this does is delay what we would be likely doing anyway. If council's intention, I'm more than happy to support a motion after this has gone through to consult on decreasing the speeds at Railway Road, to do that. By going through this weird little tit-for-tat thing within ZTA just for a bit of fun, for the jollies, is only going to delay that consultation process and our ability to lower that speed limit back down. Tennant Drive is a whole other case. I mean, it's actually quite a crying shame we don't put all those speeds back up all the way out to Linton. I mean, I don't know if any of you have driven out there. I'd love if the council team put some of those strips on the road and found out how fast people actually travelled on them, but I certainly, when I drive out there, very rarely see anybody following the speed limits on any of those roads. So the government was elected with a clear mandate to reverse the blanket speed limit changes, and I think Tennant Drive is one of them. Yes, Railway Road is perhaps a victim of circumstance, but this is just nuts, silly, Weasley, whatever word you want to use for it. Councillors, we can't support this. Let's get on with the process and then fix it, if that is council's intention, in the proper way to fix it. We cannot go around acting illegally.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Johnson, for trying to drive a bit of sensibility back into the situation we find ourselves in. I had written a whole bunch of notes, and of course the new motion which is before us here now, of course, has thrown all of that into a bit of a mess, a bit of a shambles. So I'll try and cover off some points. To Councillor Wood's kind of logic, this coalition leading into the election, they had a grab bag of public grumbles, one of which was speed limits around certain locations, and they made it policy. That's what they did. And now and so everything that had been done by the previous government, they said, we'll reverse it, and they went through everything. The previous Transport Minister called these woke speed limits. Well, actually, I'm quite happy to be called woke, along with the previous speed limits, because that is actually about being enabled and alive to the science of speed and the effect that it has in terms of the safety of our community. The reversal of the speed limits was based upon populism, ignoring the risks to people and their families, disregarding the science, road design safety, overriding expertise, and there is absolutely no evidence at all to say that this is going to support more productivity around New Zealand. It is absolute garbage. To really get people back into some facts, is that in 2021, the social cost of road crashes, serious and fatal, was $9.8 billion. And that's only increased in the recent years. That's 4% of GDP. Those that are into maths and what we actually have to spend in terms of budgets, I suggest that you really take a long thought about that, because that is a huge amount of money. New Zealand has 7.3 deaths per 100,000 people. Sweden 2.1, Australia 4.5. So we have a very, very bad crash record with a very bad set of outcomes. We were talking about reversing speed limits where there are 4 black spots. El Prado, Roberts Line, back up to 100 kilometres an hour in our Eastern Industrial Zone, absolute stupidity. Changes to Summerhill and Tennant also has 2 black spots in there, and there have been fatal crashes in those locations as well. This will get challenged. I'm happy to take the challenge. When I was contemplating what we had before us before, I actually was contemplating walking out on the vote, and I was going to urge every one of you to do the same thing. What this government is doing to local government, and I touch on the withdrawal of the NZTA funding, is also part of the issues that we are facing. The underfunding of local government is critical, and this is just a part of, I think, overreach by central government into our affairs.
Councillor
The higher the
Hancock,
speed,
could you wrap
the
up?
bigger the mess. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Michaled.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't expecting to be on the queue. But just want to highlight, highlight some of the comments that have been made also, will reinforce some of the comments that have been made by Councillor Wood. But it's good to see that we have a woke mayor and a woke city councillor. Just for laughs. But I understand the sentiments that are coming from the mayor and Councillor Johnson around this. And it's true that, you know, central government have been pushing local government about and around over the last few years. And I think my sentiment around this is largely around just, you know, central government gives directives. And by law and by virtue of the concept of parliamentary sovereignty, we can't do much about it. Parliament is the supreme law-making power in this nation. So whether we like what they do or not, we are legally bound to do it, in as much as I'm in favor of doing everything that I want to do in a positive way for my community, or I've swore in this room to do what's best for the community. At the end of the day, by virtue of the concept or the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, we have to go by the rules, and I'm not prepared to illegally do this. It's illegal in the sense that we're lying, or we're not being honest or upfront enough by basically classifying these roads as rural connectors when some of them are urban connectors. And personally, I won't be voting for this, in as much as I want to do what's best for the community, and I will comply by the the directives being given by central government, because they've got the lawmaking power in this nation, and I'm going by that. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Last week we weren't poking the bear. This week we're sticking it right up him. I'm not going to support this either, much to the disgust of a few. And no, I'm not woke. The bottom line for me is I think a quicker process will be reversal and reversal. I really do. I see where we're going. I think we're going to drag this thing out a lot longer than what it would have been. A whole lot longer. I think reversal would be the far quicker way. So, you know, that's me. That's where I'm going.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to start by acknowledging Peter, who worked extensively for at least a year on a draft speed management plan for naught, it seems. But as regards to rural connector roads, I live rurally, very rurally, and Tennant Drive is how I access the city every single day, and so do all of my neighbours in Kahutarawa and Linton. Summerhill Drive is how you access Turitea, and it's how Turitea accesses the city. Those are rural zones. They are our connectors. I'm a little bit annoyed that I didn't think of this myself, actually. So I drive these roads all the time. Councillor Wood, people do adhere to the speed limits for the most part. There's the odd speeder. The intersection with Old West Road is safer now with a low speed limit because large freight trucks are coming through there all the time and army vehicles are coming through there all the time. It is safer for me at that intersection as it is currently. A blanket approach that disregards its own rules, that is what is nuts. It doesn't matter at all what the evidence shows or what the community wants, and if it breaches the new rules or not. That is a ridiculous way to make decisions for specific roads for no demonstrable objective. That's what's nuts. And I have no confidence whatsoever in this process. This is an incredible waste of resources and time. And as a rural resident, I'm connected to the city every single day by 2 of the 3 roads in question, so I don't feel remotely disingenuous. Thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. Back to the Mayor for right of reply.
So the woke mayor will have a right of reply. Look, I don't want to politicise this, but it's good to have a bit of fun, isn't it? Look, I actually agree with some government decisions, and I can understand why in other areas and other cities there has been some reversals. You just need to speak to colleagues in Hawke's Bay, in Wairarapa, Taupo, and I can understand that. But one size doesn't fit all, and this isn't China. We can actually voice our opinion. We can, you all took the oath around the city, so, we all support different things and different parties at different times, but actually this is about the city. And thanks to Councillor Zabellan just teasing out what some of these roads actually are. And I'd have to say to the officers, I'm sorry, but I did think you have got some of this wrong. We're not lying. Technically, there is farmland all around all of those roads. Yeah. Railway Road, I think, is in the wrong classification to start with. So I stand by that, absolutely. Also, we just can't, this isn't right. We know this isn't right, and just about everybody in this room probably knows this isn't right. Even some that are going to vote against it know it isn't right, but they don't technically want to see themselves breaking the law. I'm going to challenge the law and just say we're we're coming back and saying, we believe these are connectors with a lot of rural land around them, and this is wrong for our city. Now, it might have been right for another city, but for Palmerston North, it doesn't make sense. Absolutely doesn't make sense. So let's see where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll invite you to vote. And that has failed for a lack of majority, 5 votes to 5. So we will need to open up for an alternative recommendation, if anyone has one. Councillor Wood.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations in the order papers, seconded by Councillor Hapara.
Okay, so the recommendations in the paper have been moved and seconded. I'll open that up if anyone would like to make a comment. Councillor Johnson.
I would like to make a comment. I actually had quite a lot of comments myself had this been proposed to start with. The first comment I want to make is that this is a waste of time, our time, staff time and resources to change these speed limits back and then to go through yet another consultation process with the community that we have already done in order to put safe speed limits in. But that in itself is bad enough, but what I am concerned about is we might actually be wasting people's lives. When these speed limits are changed back up again, these roads are going to be a lot more dangerous. We've already lost lives on Railway Road. We've lost a life that I can recall on Summerhill Road, a cyclist. There's a lot more at stake here than perhaps councillors realise. That's the first thing. The second thing to say is, it's another week, another cost on local government coming from central government. I mean, if they so badly want to be part of local government, I don't know why they didn't stand in our elections instead of the general election. But that be as it may. Thirdly, I mean, there's been a bit of a joke, you know, around the table, etc. But this isn't actually a joking matter. This is deadly serious stuff. And lots of times, I've disagreed with direction from government, and I've reluctantly, agreed to go along with it. But this is a step too far. I'm going to be voting against this, and I would advise you to as well. I don't want it on my conscience when these speed limits go up, and particularly not if someone is injured or killed. This is the wrong thing to do. And I actually would challenge those of you who say, oh, well, we just need to, meekly obey the law. We actually need to stand for what we think is right. That's why we were elected. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. So you all make your own decisions.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I also am going to vote against this. I've actually been to countless fatals, probably too many to remember. And a lot of my colleagues, when I was in the police, have seen so many terrible things that they cannot unsee. This particular, Councillor Johnson is absolutely right. Those roads, there are 4 black spots sitting in there, and increasing the speeds there is just irresponsible. All for the sake of some political point. And I'm just mortified that we're in this situation. It's just so wrong. The cost to the community is in the billions annually for road crashes, fatalities, and for serious injuries. Increasing speed limits in these local areas is just defies any form of logic, and there is absolutely no evidence to suggest it is going to actually support any of the government's wants or needs. So I'm going to be voting against it, and I urge you all to do the same. Thank you.
Over to the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we please separate A and B, if that's possible, in the vote? And if I could just speak to... I won't support B because I do genuinely think the officers have made a mistake in the sense that it is a rural connecting road, and I think that would struggle in a challenge because it genuinely is that, and there's probably a lot of nodding heads in that space. So I'm going to support 1 because we lost the last debate, and I won't stand in front of that. But in terms of number 2, I urge you not to support it, and we don't support the speed limit decrease because I just don't believe it's been categorised right. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't be supporting either recommendation. I think we're elected to act in the best interests of our community, and I was certainly comfortable with recategorising those roads, particularly how rural they are. There's plenty of trees around and farmland around all of those. So I won't be supporting these recommendations. Councillor McAleod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be supporting both recommendations. I think the reason why I would support this is simply because, number one, when I get re-elected in this role, I swore in this room that I would do what's best for the community. But I also swore to uphold the law. Yes, it's true that we might not agree with everything that central government does, and we need to push back. But that opportunity came, and it's gone by. That was through the consultation process before it came. So we could have, that was our opportunity to do it, that sort of thing. But it is now a directive, and I am going to support this because I do not want to break the law, which I swore not to break in this very room. I'm not entirely in favor of all the changes that have been happening around this area, but it is a directive. So I want the council to be compliant rather than being non-compliant. So on that basis, that's why I'll be voting in favor of this. And I totally get the sentiments from the councils that are voting against this. But personally, I'll be voting on that basis that I've outlined earlier. Thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting either, and just want to point out that what the practical impact of this change will be. Going up Summerhill, you'll be in a 50k zone till the Fitzherbert Bridge, then you will go to 70 for a very short stretch to the bottom of the interchange, then it will go to 60 again, and then it will go to 70 again at the top of Summerhill Drive. That's barely a 2k stretch with 4 speed zones. It's just illogical. My name will not be on the public record as supporting this law. That's not sentiment, that's just sense.
Okay, Councillor Wood.
Councillor Meehan's in the queue, Madam Chair.
I've handed it to you for...
Oh, this is right of reply, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This makes sense, but we still go back to my original comment that I think the process of the reversal will be quicker than anything. And yes, I understand it's going to cost, and I understand we've got to do the best for the community. And I'm not going to give a damn about breaking laws or going with governments and not governments. I don't give a continental about any of that. All I'm worried about is what it's going to cost our ratepayers. And I truly believe that if we play with it any other way than the way it was delivered to us, okay, it's going to cost us more in the long run and take longer than if we just go reversal. Okay? Simple.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, Councillor Meehan's quite right here. Whether you support or don't support this, if you want to see it dealt with, whatever your political persuasion may be, if we want to see Railway Road lowered back down, then you've got to go through this process and then go through the consultation process to revert it. It might be irritating, it might be all of those things, but it is what it is. That's what's in front of us. I would be interested from officers what happens if we don't decide either way. I don't know what happens then. The NZTA just go and make the decision for us. We're playing in very uncertain territory here. I'm not going to make a party political speech about supporting or not supporting speed limit reductions. I mean, I find it irritating in this chamber that if I make a speech that might support my political party, and then many other councillors make speeches to support their political parties, oh, it's okay because it's their party, but it's not okay. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all councillors, we're all politicians, we all have political persuasions, and we're dealing with the matter in front of us, which is, as Councillor Micklud said, our duty to uphold the law. And so I think at the end of the day, whether you like this process or not, this is what we have to do. I would push back, Mr Mayor, I think we undermine our efforts at Te Tanganui to suggest that Railway Road is some sort of little urban, little rural connector. If anything, it's been classified wrong and it should be transit for industrial goods and people. But to suggest that it's rural when it's in the heart of a multi-billion-dollar industrial investment, I think is a significant stretch. So I don't think we would have any luck there. I don't think it's up to councillors to go, oh, it's got trees or it's in a rural area or it's not, as to what the determination is. We have a set group of officers who identify these roads as being that, based off the guidance from NZTA. So let's just get on with the process, and then if councillors are inclined, which I suspect they will be, to look at reversing those speed limits back to where they were, then, as Councillor Mann said, we can do that. But we gain nothing apart from irritating our partner that we are trying to get more funding from and work closer with by doing this. So please, councillors, let's have some sense and support this.
Thank you. So we will vote on recommendation 1. That has passed 6 votes to 4. We'll now vote on recommendation 2. That fails for a lack of majority. So recommendation 1 will go to council for consideration next week. Thank you. We'll move to the committee work schedule on page 297. And invite Kim to, have you got anything to add to that?
Through Madam Chair, nothing to add to what's already in front of you in the committee work schedule. Some of the commentary and things have been updated as to where various pieces of work are at.
Any questions on that? Okay, I'm happy to move the committee receive its work schedule. If I could look for Councillor Zabellin to second it. Thank you. And we'll vote on that. And that's passed 10 votes to 0. And that concludes our work today. Thanks to the governance staff. And we're just going to close with the karakia. I'd just invite Councillor Zabellin to close. Thank you.
Ngā mihi, Madam Chair. Me karakia tātou. Kia puta ki te whaiau, ki te ao marama, whakamaua ki a tīna. Haumie, hui e, tāe ki e.